Hi everybody, good to see you all here. Hello and welcome. My name is Eugene Rosengourt. I'm a denturist and a dental technician out of Sandy, Utah. I'm also an instructor for American Denturist College. And today we're going to spend probably a couple hours talking about customization of digital dentures or digitally fabricated dentures, maybe. Something to do with digital and removable prosthetics. So let me just take a look, and looks like we're live. Looks like we're going with no problems at all here. I'm gonna grab my iPad real quick so I just can have it in front of me and make sure if there's any questions or anything else, I can see them and try to answer them as much as possible. First and foremost, big thanks to GC America for allowing me to do this. It's one of the very first webinars that I've done. It's the first webinar that I've done in this capacity where I'm doing like a hands-on demo and talking and everything else. So it's going to be interesting to see. If you guys have any issues or anything else with sound or video, let me know in the comments. I'll be trying to read them as I go along and try to kind of adjust things. It's a bit of a complex setup. I have a couple of cameras going on. There's one on me. There's one on the desk as well, and I also have a screen sharing thing going on. So things can possibly go awry, but hopefully everything's going to be okay. So let's talk a little bit about digital denture fabrication and aspects associated with it. So I've been doing digital dentistry or digital dentures in some capacity for about, I want to say, a year or so. Most of the stuff that I generally fabricate digitally would be base plates, custom trays, surgical guides, try-ins. I started to do a lot of try-ins lately digitally. Before, when I was doing try-ins, I was doing them monolithically, so we print the base and the teeth together. What I've started doing recently is that utilizing Vita Vigo teeth, which are teeth specifically fabricated for digital restorations. So what I do is I'll set up in 3 shape. I'll print a base plate. I'll put the teeth into base plate. I'm not going to bond them. I'm just going to lute them together with wax and send it in for try-in. Once the try-in is done, everything's verified. We either just rescan things and do a reset, or we can bond to that base if it's a permanent type of base. You can mill another base and bond to that, or you can even flask and conventionally process it if you need to. So you have quite a few options. And from that point, once it's fabricated, I generally like to customize my dentures, and I've been doing customized gingival shades with my dentures for, I don't know, a little over 6 years. I've been working with composites, and I started with composites simply because I had trouble getting things done in acrylics. So the way I've learned, and the way I've learned from other technicians in school and stuff like this, how to customize restorations, was to do them inside a flask. So you do it, you pack your denture, you do a boil out, you either do it with silicone, you do it with stone, and then you sprinkle, powders and a little bit of monomer and just kind of go in those layers. And there are some people that do an amazing job doing that. I mean, I have a couple of friends that just get ridiculous results. I mean, it's so good. With me, on the other hand, my results were a bit hit and miss, and it has nothing to do with the technique. It has to do with my lack of skills on that matter. And I'm sure if I was persistent enough and I was doing it enough and everything else, and I could have maybe gotten somewhat mediocre at it. But around that time, I started looking into a composite system, and at that time it was Gradia gum shades. And what I liked about that system is that what you see is what you get kind of thing. Because when you're applying the colors, you can see the colors right away. You can see where you have too much opacity, not enough opacity? Do you need to dilute? Do you need to thicken? And you kind of went from there. And I was able to achieve the results that I wanted a lot quicker. And so I just went with that. And I slowly built up things that I was doing with it. And there was a lot of arguments back and forth. Should you be using composites? Should you be using acrylics to colorize dentures? And they each have their own merit, because, you know, with acrylic powders inside the flask, obviously it's a lot quicker and you're there and done, and then you just go with polish and everything else. With composites, you know, it does take a bit longer. However, when you start getting into digital dentistry, for example, and a lot of you guys, including me, are headed in that direction. Not to say, for example, that, you know, everything's going to be digital and I'm going to be fabricating all my restorations digitally, or printing them, or milling them, and there's no room for analog. And that's simply not true. I mean, there's areas where digitally fabricated, maybe not complete restorations, but parts of restorations are amazing. For example, I started doing base plates for my wax rims, and I started doing custom trays and digitally printing them, and I haven't been happier because it's very precise. It's very precise if you do it right. Let's put it that way. You know, it's not always like as easy as it sounds. You know, people make it sound like, well, you just press a button and this thing pops out, and there's nothing to it. You don't need no skill. You don't need to adjust anything. That's not true. First of all, it takes a lot of time to learn the programs. Well, at least for me, it does. There's monetary investment, and then it takes time to kind of adjust things. And depending on what kind of equipment you're using, some will require more adjustments, some will require less adjustments. But all the things are technique sensitive. So, but if you do get everything put together, and if you do get things adjusted properly, the final results for my custom trays, for my base plates, for my tri-ends and stuff, I haven't been able to achieve these kind of results without putting a lot of extra effort by doing things with my hands. But when it comes to other things, you know, I still think the analog way is a lot more precise also, but also it gives your own personal touch. And then for people like me, it's a lot harder to get used to doing stuff on the screen, because you've done things with your hands for so many years, and then trying to learn to do things with a mouse, it's like learning how to walk all over again. Because I'm literally, like, when I'm trying to model stuff on the screen, I'm literally trying to look over the screen, because when I'm rotating things, I'm trying to get a better view. I mean, your brain doesn't really fully comprehend things yet. So so it does take a little bit of time. But once the restoration is fabricated, whether you're doing it a printed or a milled restoration, or milled PMMA, then in order to customize that, you're left with composites. You can't customize those with acrylic powders. Which, for me, I kind of got lucky, because I started doing that a while ago, because I kind of sucked at using powders, but and it came full circle now, and I see a lot more people using composites, and that's why these kind of webinars are a lot more important now, because it's kind of what we need to do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about fabrication of my digital restorations and the steps that I go through in order to get that done. Can everybody hear me? Okay, let me just look over the comments real quick. Most of the comments are in Russian. Sorry, guys. This looks like everybody can hear me, okay? All right, let's take a look. So a lot of these slides are going to be fabricated with the Gradia gum composites, and I have recently switched to Gradia Plus, but the basic steps are the same. And plus, I'll be showing you guys how to do everything, demoing things. So, unfortunately, for folks that are asking me to comment and to do the webinar in other languages. Unfortunately, this one's going to be in English only. If you have any further questions down the line, you can always private message me and I'll answer it too. In Russian or well, in Russian or English. It's pretty much the only two ones I know. All right. So there's some basic steps that are associated with fabrication and customization of either regular analog dentures or digital dentures. With the regular analog, you do the cutback in either a wax form before processing, or me personally, I prefer to do the cutback after the denture has been processed. Just simply because I can visualize things a little bit better, and I'm not worried about getting stuff moved, because I have had that happen when I try to carve things back in wax. I ended up moving teeth. And also for the people that are just starting to learn that, if you have a full contour restoration and if you're doing cutback, you can do half arch cutback and still look at the full contour on the other side of the restoration and be able to kind of build things up from that point. Okay. So this one is done by analog, so the reduction was gone, and you can see this is a very important kind of thing to remember. You can see that I do my reduction about, I don't know, about 3 to 4 millimeters from the vestibular area. And the reason for that, well, when you're doing a denture, and it's a tissue-supported type of restoration, it's very important to preserve the borders of your restoration, because from the clinical standpoint, you spend a lot of time trying to capture that border, trying to capture those parameters in order to have a good suction. If you mess with that region too much, you're going to end up losing that suction, and the denture is not going to be retentive. You're either going to have to reline it, or you're going to have to, I don't know, use adhesive or switch it to implant retain tissue supported or fully implant retain and implant supported. But in this case, we're talking about fully tissue supported restoration. So when you're doing your cutback, make sure you go about, between anywhere from 3 to 5 millimeters below the vestibular line. And then I go all the way down to the margin of the tooth. And you do your cutback about anywhere from 0.5 to 1 millimeter. I generally don't recommend going more than that, because I think if you going to reduce more than 1 millimeter, you're going to be introducing a potential for fractures in acrylic, possibly. And also possible micro fractures and composite. However, with the new Gradia Plus system, I mean, I looked at the specs and they're pretty up there, so I'm not too worried about the actual composite restoration. Once that is done, you can either do the abrasion like I did, reduction abrasion at the same time with the burr, or I prefer to use aluminum oxide abrasion, and I'm using a 50 micron aluminum oxide at 2 bar pressure. I just think you get a lot better surface preparation in the areas that are needed, because with carbides sometimes you can't get to those little interproximal areas too well, or maybe it'll just take too much time. I think with air abrasion you're just able to get things prepped a lot easier, but that's a personal preference. It's not something that is required, so I think that's I think it should work both ways. I'll just leave it at that. Okay. The one thing with that's works better with carbide abrasion versus air abrasion. With carbide abrasion, you don't have to worry too much about trapping extra, aluminum oxide particles and having to clean those up. And when I started doing this, I had a real problem with this, because people talk all the time. You can't use any kind of moisture with composites because it's going to ruin things, it's going to affect things, and that's true to a point. But the thing is, what works well is that if you used moisture and then you got rid of moisture completely. And I understand there's no way of telling 100% if you've got rid of it completely or not. But the way I've set up my protocol, the way I've been using it for 6 years, and the way the restorations have been turning out, has been working out well for me. And that's what it is pretty much today. I mean, I'm sharing with you guys my protocol. I'm not trying to be dogmatic here and say, you know what, this is the way you're supposed to be doing things. I'm trying to be more of a, okay, let me show you what I do, and then you can adjust your protocols from that point on, okay? So one thing I started doing once I do the air abrasion, in order to get rid of the residual aluminum oxide particles, is I'll use compressed air, make sure that air is oil-free and moisture-free. Well, oil-free predominantly. And get rid of all that bulk of things that you can. And then what I do is I use a steam cleaner. And the steam cleaner works wonderfully for removing the rest of that residual aluminum oxide. Well, now we're left with a problem. We have a denture that's been saturated with water, right? Or steam, whatever you want to call it. And now we need to get rid of that somehow. And before I was using steam, I was like, I can't use steam because there's moisture. I try to use alcohol. You can't use alcohol because alcohol, if you look over things, that over time, especially if you don't have cross-polymerized acrylic, can cause microfractures in the acrylic. And you can see that a lot of times with like clear acrylics. You'll see like little webbing. So you can't use that. I try to use monomer. You can't use monomer, but man, like I haven't been able to smell monomer for years, but when we have to clean with monomer, you have to use a lot of it, and even I smelled it. So that's not a good thing. But then I was talking to GC research team out of Japan, and they're like, just steam clean it. Like steam clean it, you can't. It's like, well, yeah, you can't have moisture, but if you dry it, it's no longer an issue. So what I do is once I steam clean it, I use compressed air to blow off the residual moisture off the top, and then I'll use a hot air gun. Not like the industrial size hot air gun. I'm using something a lot smaller. Or you can also use a dehydrator. It will take a lot longer, and I don't have the patience for it. And honestly, I haven't tried it that way myself. I just use a hot air gun, just a hobby one, the small one. Just go over it, and you can literally see the acrylic, desiccating, the moisture being taken from it. So works fairly well. All right, I'm seeing a lot of questions about Optiglaze, and I'm going to cover that a little bit down the line. We're going to be here for a while, let's put it that way. Okay, so this is what it looks like after you've air-abrated everything, you've cleaned everything, you've dried everything. So it looks nice and rough surface, but it's completely clean, right? And it's very important with these type of restorations. You want it to be dry and clean. When I'm working on these, I'm wearing gloves, or at least one glove, not because I want to look like Michael Jackson, but you want to be holding your instruments with maybe ungloved hand. But if you're holding your denture, you want to have something covering your hands that have moisture and they have oils on them and stuff like this. Even if they seem clean, they'll still have things on there, and which can play a part down the line. Maybe not right away, but it may reduce the longevity of the restoration. I don't know, 3, 5, 7 years down the line, kind of thing. Okay, so with the Gradia system, we used Composite Primer. And you applied it over the surface where you want to apply the down the line the composite, and you want to make sure things stick together, because if you just apply it to the dry surface by itself, it's not going to work over time. So we use Composite Primer. You apply it, don't apply it too much because it doesn't really evaporate. It kind of stays on the surface. And if you put too much on there, it will make it a little bit difficult to apply composite because it's just going to flow all over the place. It just makes things messy. So just apply enough to wet the surface, and then you light cure it for 1 minute. And I'm using a Labolight Duo myself. There's different kinds of lights you can be utilizing. My recommendation to you is to use the LED version of things and make sure that the wavelengths are proper, because there's some issues associated with using lights that are, let's say, for example, using like a triad machine. The problem with these big halogen units is that they produce a ton of heat. So you have a very broad spectrum of light, right? You go anywhere from like, I don't know, 300 to 700. But a lot of this light is not necessary for what you need to do. I mean, yeah, the higher the spectrum, the deeper the light is going to go, but your wavelength that you're using is limited to the product that you're using. Well, let's say if you're curing the Gradia composite or the primer, you're going to be utilizing anywhere from, I don't know, 420 to 490 nanometers in wavelength. If you're using Optiglaze, for example, the wavelength is going to be a lot lower, so you can't maybe utilize certain lights for that. You know, if you ever tried that with some lights that it's still sticky, it was because it doesn't have enough low enough wavelength to get this cured. But let me go back. With halogen units like Triad machine, it has a broad spectrum of light, which will cure your composite and will cure your glaze. But the problem, a lot of that light is not necessary, but what it does produces a ton of heat. And that heat is not good because it will warp your acrylics. One, it can burn your acrylics and can definitely burn your Optiglaze, which is like a thin coating of a filled resin, lightly filled resin. And it can change shades on that for you. So that's why I recommend using light units that are LED. And there's a ton of them on the market now. It's not like it used to be. Okay. So we apply the primer, and I put mine in the Light Duo for 1 minute. And if you look at the different composite system, in my case, I'm using pretty much now 95% of the restorations I do is Gradia Plus. You're going to see that the paperwork that comes with it kind of gives you a couple of different lights, and it kind of gives you the adjustment rates. You know, you go from like minutes to seconds and everything like this. Obviously, the stronger the light, the less time you want to have in there. But the Light Duo has worked well for me because it's got the two types of LEDs. One that is used for application of composite, and one's for the glaze. So it works really well. So once this has been applied, we put it in the box, cured for 1 minute. Once that's done, we're ready to apply our composites. And that can be done in layers, or it can be done all at once. The thing that I had with the Gradia system, I had to do it in layers because of the translucencies and things, and I didn't have the mixing wasn't done to my liking because it's slightly more flowable, and I had some issues with that because if you mix things up too much and you try to apply it, it would just flow all over the place. Okay, but if you are using the Gradia Plus system, that's no longer an issue. That stuff stays in place fairly well, and I've actually been able to do everything in 1 or maybe 2 layers max. Okay, and the question was asked, why not use the acrylic primer by GC? Well, you can absolutely use the acrylic primer by GC on this type of restorations. However, if you are using a printed restoration, I don't know if you could use the acrylic primer. There's a high possibility that you could, but the testing that I did was still using the composite primer, and it worked really well. And because the composite primer works well on composite restorations and acrylic restorations, I kind of felt that for me that would work better. And I've used acrylic. If you're using an all acrylic restoration, I would absolutely recommend you use acrylic primer. Okay, because these primers are formulated for that specific reason, right? So if you're doing an acrylic restoration and you're using nothing but acrylic, absolutely use an acrylic primer. But if you're using a printed base, even though printed material is, methyl methacrylate based, acrylic primer might work, and I need to do a little bit more research on that. But from what I've done with composite primer, it works great on printed, and I've done testing with relines. So when I do, let's say you have a printed restoration, you need to reline it. I applied the composite primer, like here, that hard reline material sticks great to it. Then if you need to, let's say I want to do a soft reline. That's one thing that was, I think Glenn told me about this. So if you use GC soft liner that comes in the tubes, using that on printed works great as long as you air braid it and apply the composite primer, cure it for 1 minute. That soft liner sticks to it really well. I mean, I've done tests where I try to rip it off and I'm having a hard time. When we take a break, I'll go look. I think I have a sample of that laying somewhere, and it works great for that. So that's why I kind of still use the composite primer, because I kind of tend to mix things up a little bit. So that's why I kind of do that. But like, once again, if you're using a purely acrylic restoration, yes, acrylic primer will work great on that. So here I did in a couple of layers. And usually when you do in layers, you do like a intermittent freezing, and just do the level I do has got 2 settings on it. It's got like the regular one, and it's got the step light setting, because in the old system we had 2 lights, right? We had the curing light, we had a step light. I still have them actually. And on this one, it's got like a button. You hit it and get like a 10-second thing that can freeze it. So when I'm moving colors around, if I want to freeze something, you just freeze it right there, and then you just you can put it in for like a minute, just in case, so you have a complete cure of every layer. It's not really necessary. You can do just a freeze, freezing for 10 seconds and then do a final cure. It should be more than enough to penetrate all the layers. I just like to be extra careful with these things. That's why I go a minute. Okay. And that's what I did. So I did 3 layers. I did my like really intense colors on the bottom, and then I put my like less intense colors on top, and then on the very final layer I would do my texturing. And the reason I did the like very final layer, because it was more translucent, and also when you have a thin layer, it was a lot easier to texture with a Gradia system, because like I say, it was the flowability of things wasn't working as well as I wanted it to. And you would texture everything, and then at that point you would put in your curing unit, and you would do you would do 2 things. I would put in the curing unit and I'd cure it for 1 minute just to freeze everything in place, and then I would apply my air barrier and cure it for an additional 3 minutes to make sure you have final cure. What the air barrier essentially does, it gets rid of that sticky layer. So that's layer of inhibition, that sticky layer, it allows you to add more composite to things while you're doing it in layers. If you get rid of that layer, your composite won't stick to itself. You have to reprime things. With this, you would use just composite primer, but if you're using Gradia Plus system, which it has a lot more, a lot more ceramic filler to it, you would use a ceramic primer virtually, and it works really well for that as well, to reestablish that the sticky layer to it. Hopefully I'm explaining it properly and not confusing you guys. But if you are not understanding me 100%, please let me know. I'll try to re-explain it again. But I'll be going over it a couple of times with a couple of different restorations on the slides, and then when I'm going to be showing you guys the demo as well, it's going to kind of hopefully make sense to you guys. Get a sip of coffee here. Okay, let me move things around a little bit just so I have better access to my keyboard, because what happens, I have to stretch quite a bit so I get things clickety-click. So once you do the 1 minute cure, then you apply the air barrier and you cure for 3 minutes. And then what it does, it gets rid of that sticky layer that's on top of things. Once that's done, you can just simply remove this with water. Water and brush works better. What I like to do is I like to just kind of clean things up with water first, and then I'll go and pumice it lightly, because I do have it to full contour where I need to have it, but in the areas that I might not be very well visible, you might have some peaks on it. And I want to get rid of those peaks, because, they could be, first of all, they could be irritating to the patient. And second, I prefer to glaze my restorations. And, if you have a peak somewhere and you try to apply glaze, it will just kind of flow down and you'll have an exposed surface. So I do a light pumicing with like a medium grit pumice, and then I clean that off. And then I'll sandblast the entire surface that I want to apply things to. Okay. And once I do that, I don't apply any kind of primer. I'll just apply glaze right on top of that, Optiglaze. I use Optiglaze for those types of applications. So this is what it looks like once it's been, pumiced and air braided. I'm not using any primer because if you use, like, for example, if you use composite primer on Optiglaze, so if, let's say I put a composite primer on here and I activated it and I try to put Optiglaze, it's not going to work. It's going to ruin that glaze. So you don't want to do that. You just want a dry, nicely dried surface. Now we use quite a bit, not me personally, but a lot of my friends are using clear luster paints to glaze things. And there you would use a ceramic primer because, the composite itself has a lot of ceramic filler to it. You would, prime things with the ceramic primer and you would apply the luster paint on it. Technically, from what I understand, you can probably still use ceramic primer on this composite and use Optiglaze, and that shouldn't make any difference. However, I am applying over the entire surface of the denture, and it's not all composite. Some parts are composite, some parts of acrylic. So, and you're not going to be applying any kind of primer to the acrylic. So I kind of just don't apply primer at all. Okay. And here you glaze it, and I glaze just the parts that are pink. I'm not glazing the teeth unless I'm adjusting the teeth or I'm doing kind of restructuring to the teeth in either shape or shade. I'm not going to be glazing. So I'm going right to that margin and I'm stopping right there. Okay. And then you light cure that for 1.5 minutes. So, I usually do like in two applications. I'll do like the facial and the buccal regions first and cure that, and then I'll do the palatal and cure that second time. I don't usually apply it to the integral surface. It's just I've been taught in school, you don't adjust the integral, you don't polish the integral, you don't, and it's kind of been ingrained into my life and well-being or whatever. So I don't generally apply Optiglaze there, but I have done it on the case where I had a clear base, and it worked out pretty well. Actually, I had increased suction. So if you want to do that, it will probably work for you. Okay, and the thing with Optiglaze, I mean, you can polish it. It is a composite. It doesn't have a lot of filler to it, but it is a composite. So let's say if you applied it over the teeth and it looks kind of fake shiny, you can polish it up a little bit. You can dull it up, and I'll show you guys how it's done and get a slightly more natural look to it instead of having that very, very glossy fake look to it. Okay, so that's pretty much what it looks like. So the glaze goes all the way down to that right here, the dentum enamel junction right here. But only the pink is glazed. The teeth are just simply polished, high shine. Okay, this is what it looks like intraorally. I mean, it's got a very nice look to it. There's no. I know I've been doing them like this for 6 years. I mean, obviously I've adjusted my technique over the years. I started with, flowables, and then I switched over to pastes. I've just kind of been a lot happier with the paste option personally. It just works better for me. Okay, here's the patient right here. Okay, and this just kind of goes into, talks a little bit about nanofilled glazes and how well they work. And the longevity of these things is pretty well, wear resistance, everything else. However, proper application is key. There's a lot of times I've been asked, like, changes the shade and everything else, and I'll go into it a little bit in detail here in a minute. But you want to make sure you don't have any contamination. You want to make sure you properly get the surface prepared. You want to make sure you have proper applications. You want to make sure you properly light cure things. All these things make a difference. If you just kind of go, oh yeah, let's grab here and maybe dip it in this, and maybe use the same brush that you used to apply the primer beforehand, well, things are not going to work. If you didn't use a light curing unit, then why is this yellow? Why did it become dirty in a week? Why is this and why the other? So all these things are important. What I will tell you is that from my personal experience, I don't know if I'm doing it right or maybe I'm still making mistakes. I get about 2 years out of it. After about 2 years, it starts to become looking a little bit, like not as good as I want it to. And after about 2 years, I'll just sandblast the surface again and put a new coat. That's what I've been getting out of it. I've seen people that get longer results, but I have a feeling it has to be highly dependent on the type of patient you have. what kind of hygiene does this patient have? What were the steps for adjustments? Was it, pumice too much and the glaze was gone, or was glaze gone in parts? You need to kind of work as a team with the clinician when you work on these things. If your adjustments were done, maybe you need to reglaze things, or maybe don't glaze them at all in the beginning, and have all the adjustments done first, and then do the composite and the glazing. Things like this. So it's kind of highly dependent on what you want to do and how you want to do things. Okay. And the same thing with either milled or printed payment. The application process is very similar. In most things, the applications process are not going to vary greatly. It just dependent on what kind of substructure you have. You're going to change things in primers, and you're going to change things in the polishing techniques and stuff like this. But overall, it's kind of just has these basic 8 or 9 steps that you follow, and if you follow them, you get fairly decent results. Okay. With digital restorations, the reduction is a little bit easier to fabricate, because now you're not sitting there with a burr and going like, did I take enough off? Did I get it right? Did I put too much? Things like this. Is it uniform? So with digital, it makes things a little bit easier from that standpoint. I won't say it makes things greatly that much easier, but it works fast for me once I've learned how to do it. Okay. So, for example, we have a prototype right here, but that's been fully waxed up and scanned in. And then what I did is I actually made it so you could cement the type bases in there, or I'm using temporary cylinders in my case. So, but it has full gingival contour, and I need to have it reduced in order to apply my composite. So I'm using Mesh Mixer, and I switched the selection tool to lasso, which sometimes is a bit glitchy for me. I don't know why it happens. It might just be my program. But in this case, you just use the lasso tool and you just highlight the areas that you're going to be reducing. And you see I'm going a little bit away from the margin, simply because if you're going to get too close when you go to reduce things, you're possibly going to reduce the tooth as well. So I'm about, I don't know, 1.5 mm, 2 millimeters away from the margin. And I just kind of try to select the areas where I want to. And if you kind of select the area that you don't want to, you can just kind of trace your steps, and it will re-highlight it. You see what right there? That's exactly what happened. I highlighted what I didn't want to highlight. So I just kind of retraced it and retraced it again. I think I did this for a couple of times. I am still a bit slow when it comes to these things, and it takes quite a bit of a learning for me. But I'm doing a lot better than I did 1.5 years ago. Digital was a big project for me to tackle, and I'm definitely not there. You learn a little bit at a time, and the way I approached it is similar to many other people. You start with a single type of thing that you need to learn. Okay. Because what happened is that when I bought the stuff, it was just sitting here for the longest time because I never had the time to deal with it and everything else, until I got to the point where I didn't have any other choice. I'm like, I needed to do something digitally. So the first thing I did was fabricate a base plate. Either base plate or custom. I think it was a custom tray. And the reason for that is because they wanted me to get one done, but not fabricated thoroughly. They wanted me to design one, and then the doctor was going to print it in their office. So I started with that, and that was my first thing I was learning, is just fabrication of those. And then let me pause it just so I can talk a little bit about this, and I'll just go back to this as well. And from that point, I was, learn this step, and then you add to that, and you add to that, and you just keep adding until you have somewhat of a small arsenal of things you can do digitally. And it makes things a lot easier to build on top of, rather than just, okay, I'm just going to, try to tackle everything at once. So that's how I kind of did things. And I've been, I think I've been doing better lately. Okay, so here you would still want to go away from the, from the integral surface a little bit. So I'm about 2 millimeters away from that region as well. And I'm just slowly going and tracing this thing all the way around. I did this a couple of days ago, actually. I just recorded my screen. You see right here, I need to retrace it because I'm too close and also have that little bump to it. I think that I did this one 3 times. Yep, I did. It's a good thing I didn't record sound because at the time the word choice was a lot a lot less proper than it is right now. Okay, so I'm highlighting everything right here. And if you do this correctly, the lines will connect and look something like this, okay? So from this point, you press 2 buttons. You press O to optimize the border, and then you press B to kind of round things up a little bit. And if it looks good, then you just press Accept, and it will highlight the area that you're going to be reducing. Then you go to Edit and Offset. A friend of mine actually taught me this because I used to do extrude before, but I'm doing offset now. And then you set the value that you want to offset by. So the mistake I did here, you see I put 0.5, but I didn't put minus 0.5. Okay, so it actually added things. I was like, oh man, I forgot to put the minus. So I put minus 0.5, and it wasn't changing for me for some reason. So I tried to change the value just a little bit. So I minus 0.56. And once I did that, and I clicked on it and actually started going. It can be glitchy at times. It's a free software. It's a wonderful software, and it does a lot of things for you, like this. And then, but it can have some lag sometimes. It can shut down on you a little bit sometimes, but it's a great software. I use it all the time. So here, it just automatically offset things for you without having to worry too much. So once you print it or mill it, all I do down the line is I'll actually just go in these areas and just clean this up with a burr. Okay, it just takes a couple of, a minute or so. A lot faster than trying to reduce this whole thing here. Okay. All right. Next step. And I do the same thing with if you're doing like a pink base denture. The only difference is the teeth are not going to be in it. When you're designing it, it's just going to be a base plate. And you do the same thing. And you try to step away enough from the margin so when you're doing that offset, you're not going to have perforations in the margins. And that's pretty much the only difference. You do that. So once it's printed, you clean that up and you're ready to get things done. Okay? Same thing, air abrasion, composite primer, like here for 1 minute. If you're using milled PMMA, you could probably just use acrylic primer. I just been kind of a little set in my ways, I'll be honest with you. I've been using composite primer for so long that I know it works okay, and it works great for me. And I just like, well, is this the same as acrylic, or does it have acrylic and composite? That's why I kind of get confused a little bit, because I don't know enough about material sciences of the restoration that I'm fabricating, which is not a good thing to admit, but it's true. I mean, does this have just, polymethyl methacrylate, or there's some kind of additive there that maybe just acrylic primer is not going to work on? And I know the composite primer will work on it, and I'll just kind of stick with it. So maybe I've become a bit complacent at that. Maybe I need to kind of get out of my comfort zone a little bit, but at this point, this is where I'm at. And same thing here with the Gradia system. You would do it in 2-3 layers, and more importantly, because it's a white restoration, you would need to do it in 2-3 layers because you want to block out the underlying color, and which you still do with the Gradia Plus, and I'll be showing you guys how it's done. But here, this is I don't use opaques. I don't use an opaque layer on my reduced PMMAs or printed restorations that are done in white. I just don't think it's necessary. I think just simply applying a light body composite will do the blocking out that I require. Okay. So here it is. You just do second, third layers, and you step cure it for 1 minute, and then you cover it with air barrier. Or I actually started using something else. I use the ultrasound gel for my air barrier. I just had easier time cleaning it off. I'm sure this stuff is amazing, but it's just, I tried it, it worked great, and I just decided to stick with it. And it's readily available too. I mean, I don't have any issues with it. But yeah, I'll show you guys what I'm using down the line here a little bit. Okay, and then you just clean it off, sandblast it, steam clean it, hot air dry it, don't apply any kind of primer, and just glaze it. And when you're doing the teeth and the gingiva, you can use the Optiglaze color kit. Works great for me. One thing I do recommend, if you're going to be doing like an A2 type of restoration, mill it in A1. Just because when you're going to be applying these different like A pluses and whatever colors to it, it can darken things up a little bit. And the clear won't. If you apply the clear correctly, it won't change the shade on you. But applying all those other colors can kind of darken things. So I'd like to start lighter and it just kind of darken it with colors. Because if you look right here, you know, this is opacious because of it's dry. But this shade is a little bit more, has a little bit more darkness to it. Okay. And then you just polish that up and you're ready to go. And you can use denture teeth and you can just kind of adjust the colors of the denture teeth a little bit. There's a couple of different things you can do with glazes. And I had this argument a few times actually. Everybody's like, no, it changes color. It can if you are applying it a little bit different. I don't want to say wrong, but if you apply the Optiglaze too thick, it will yellow on you. There's just no getting around to it. But if you apply it in a thin layer, like the instructions say, and you cure it with a proper wavelength at the proper time, it doesn't change shade. And this is the experiment I did. I sandblasted half the tooth, and I glazed only half of it. Okay, and I put it back in the denture, and I asked people like, "Can you tell it has been glazed?" And half the people say they can't, but half the people say they can. And I go to the people that they say that they can't. Okay, which other tooth did I do the same thing to? And most people can't tell which other tooth I did this to, but I also did it to this lateral. So that to me, I could be wrong, but that to me says, you know what? If you do the applications properly, it's going to have the proper shade. It's not going to have any difference to it. With luster paints, from what I see from my friends doing it, they have really good results color-wise as well. It's just clear as glass. And you use the diluting liquids not liquids, liquid, there's just one liquid, sorry, to get the consistency that you want, because it comes out a bit thick, and by adding liquid to it, you get it as thin as you need or as thick as you need. And that's kind of great because, you know, if you want to maybe have a little bit more wear resistance, you will have it thicker. But if, like, say you're doing like an occlusal of a posterior restoration, right? And you're covering up like pit and fissure staining, you probably want to have a thicker mix because, you know, you have a nice occlusal wear there. But if you're doing an anterior region, you probably want to have it pretty thin so you don't lose the detail. But it looks really promising. I haven't used a ton of it myself, and simply because I don't do generally a lot of tooth kind of adjustments in color. I just simply glaze them, so that's why I kind of been using Optiglaze. But like I said, I'm getting more and more out of my comfort zone, and I'll be doing probably more to do with luster paints, and I'll show you guys a little bit of that as well. And you do use those luster paints a lot for adjustments of colors. Like, for example, if you're dealing with you know, African American patients and you have ethnic shades, and they don't come in those shades, right, from the start, and you need to adjust things, and I'll show you how that's done, and it actually works pretty well. Okay, so that's the thing for the glaze. You can see the line of demarcation here a little bit, and maybe just slightly yellowing right here, but on this one you can't even see that. Okay, so longevity, like, oh man, 6 years ago this was a huge topic of conversation. Everybody was like, this doesn't work, this will fall apart in 6 months, it's the most horrible thing you can imagine to do with your dentures. And I was so scared, I'll be honest with you. I was terrified of doing composite on my dentures, especially when you're like in an area when you're lecturing also, because the last thing I want to do is teach somebody something and then you're like, no, this was crap. And I've had that happen. You know, you're talking about something and you're thinking you're talking about the right thing, and down the line you realize, oh no, this wasn't right, and you try to adjust your protocols and everything. But that's life. You know, how many times have we done this in a lab? We do something and it just doesn't work out. You live and you learn. But I feel confident enough with this protocol. I've been doing it for, like I said, 6 years, that I feel confident enough that it does work. Okay, so this is the testing that I did back in those days, where I just, like, is it going to stay? Is it going to delaminate? What's going to happen? So I took a piece of acrylic. I use Nature Acryl high impact stuff. Really like that acrylic. Been using it for 6+ years, for almost as long as it's been out on the market. I sandblasted it. I primed it. I applied composite, and here I applied pastes and light bodies. And the difference is the fill rate, right? You have a lot more filler when it comes to paste. So the wear resistance is going to be higher. Also, to me, they have slightly more opacity to it. It makes it a little bit easier to hide things. So I applied it, I cured it, I sandblasted, and I glazed it. So just like I would do a regular denture, and then what I did is I actually took my pneumatic press and I fractured it. So I just, like, between two flasks and a piece of metal, just broke it. Highly scientific, not so much. I mean, I don't have like a machine that breaks things, obviously, but I was able to use my camera, take some macro shots on it, and I saw, you know what, it's not delaminating. And that was the biggest thing for me. Like, is it going to delaminate? Is it going to have cracks in it? Well, if you fracture it, it's going to have these cracks in it. But overall, if you apply it in layers less than, you know, a millimeter thickness, when you go to break things, they don't go. And if you look at things, you know, there's some research out there, and you can say, you know, weaken restorations. Okay, first of all, you need to properly apply things. You can't just willy-nilly use, okay, I'm going to use this primer with this light, and I'm going to cure it for this amount of time. No, follow directions. You know, if you're using a halogen light, you got to use proper length, proper time length in order to cure that primer. You know, if you're going to leave it there for 10 minutes, you're going to bake that primer and everything that's underneath there. So that you have to be careful with those things. So kind of look into those. And then I am asked all the time, why don't you just polish these things? And composite does polish well. I mean, especially these newer composites, they polish wonderfully. But for me, that's not the issue. The issue is the junction of composite to acrylic. Okay, if I was doing like an all composite restoration, or there was no junction, or the junction was minimal, like only to the teeth, I wouldn't have any problems just, you know, polishing most of it and just maybe glazing that area. But because I'm dealing with acrylic junction to composite, and you know, I'm having some issues with the margins. I just can't physically polish it that well. And even if it looks like you can, take if you don't have a, you know, macro lens on your camera, you know, take a microscope or something. You know, a lot of ground bridge guys have a microscope. Take a look at where it goes right there. And I use loops when I apply things, so it's a little bit easier to see, but you'll see that you don't have it as polished as you want it. So I took a couple of samples of acrylic and I polished them all in different ways, some by hand, some by, you know, lathe. And I did a couple of samples with composite. There's one right here. And I glazed that sample eventually. But the first one I did was like this, and I didn't glaze it, I just polished it. I polished the hell out of it. I don't know if I can say hell on here, but I really did a lot to polish this thing. And I used like diamond polishing, and I used acrylic polishing, and I used high shine, low shine, whatever shine you want to, anything except for Henry shine I was using to polish this thing up. And then I just put them in a vat of tea for like a week, because tea stains things pretty well, right? Almost like wine. I didn't have any wine, not because I don't drink wine. My wife drinks wine, but I just felt like if I was going to put wine in, my wife would get upset at me. No, I'm kidding. So I just put tea, because a lot of people drink tea, and then a lot of, you know, and you drink tea all the time. I drink tea daily. And you see what kind of staining potential it has. And you can see that right at the margins, it stains things. And you can see these little divots right here, it stains things as well. And I really, really try to polish things really well. But then when I took the same sample, you see this is a close-up view. I took the same sample, I glazed it, and did the same thing for a week. Nothing. Okay, so it has to do with roughness coefficients and sealing of things, right? So the polished acrylic has a roughness coefficient, I think is around 250 or something like this. And it needs to be below 200 not to have any kind of plaque biofilm adherence. So anything over 200, and obviously the higher you go, the more rough it's going to be, and the more plaque adherence you're going to have. So Optiglaze unfortunately doesn't go below 200, but it's just slightly above 200. So it really does reduce that adhesion quite a bit, doesn't eliminate it, and it will over time build up, obviously. But it's still better than just polished acrylic. And also the main reason, you look at those margins, it just seals those cracks. You know, because the nanofill composite just kind of uses that filler in the matrix to fill all those little regions in there. Will you lose a bit of detail? Very minimal. And obviously, depending on which Optiglaze you use, you will lose or gain as much detail as dependent on the thickness of the Optiglaze. So the Optiglaze that I have is in 3 different kinds. There's I call it the old school Optiglaze. It comes in the black bottles, and it looks like this that you saw, guys. In the, so it's a black bottle, blue lighting. Blue writing, not lighting. Maybe I should drink more coffee. Okay. And then you have the Optiglaze color kit that also has 2 bottles in it. So this has medium thickness is what I call it. The ones in the kit come in really runny, and it comes in the HV, which is heavy viscosity, which is very viscous. It has a lot of filler to it, so the wear resistance is a lot higher, but you will lose a lot of detail. So like I said, you know, you kind of adjust things to where you need to be. Like if you're using like a Cerasmart crown, for example, where you need to have posterior occlusal surface to have less wear, you would use high viscosity. If you're doing interior where you don't want to lose texture, you would use the very thin stuff. Okay. All right. Comments. So far, so good. Okay, same thing with application. So here I was actually using the Opaque because we're doing some testing like on metal. If you just want to do like a lock of the metal bar or something like this. When I was doing like Swiss locks, I was doing testing with Optiglaze over the Opaque, and if I was going to use a primer or not use a primer. And by applying the primer, it just didn't work, as you can see right here. But if you just, you know, sandblast things and apply straight on, it works just fine. Okay. Did I do this? I actually think what I did is I actually pasted it twice onto the onto my PowerPoint. Sorry. But this is what I wanted to show you guys. So one's hand polished, one's glazed. So when I'm trying to polish things, even if I go really aggressively into proximal, like as you can see right there, like I really try to get in there, I cannot get right in between those teeth. Okay. And with glazing, I don't really have to do that much. You know, like if I was polishing that, I would lose that detail. Okay. And with the glazing, I kept the detail and I sealed everything up, and it worked out great for me. Okay. So, I think for these type of restorations, glazing is better. But once again, that's just my opinion. A lot of people still will polish things and do them that way, and that's fine as well. Like I say, if you read the manual, it tells you can either manually polish things or you can glaze them. All right. This right here kind of goes into detail of the curing times and the depth of cure. Remember, like if it's you know, different colors are going to have different depth of cure depending on the time. Okay. And different lights. You see, a Labo Light Duo is a LED light, and a Labo Light, the previous one was a fluorescent light, so that obviously things are going to change. And halogen light, you see, like if you're using a Labo Light Duo versus a halogen light, 40 versus 90 seconds. So if you do a halogen light for 90 seconds, what do you think is going to happen? Well, you're going to overheat things. You can possibly warp things. You can possibly burn things. You know, so just be careful with it. Plasma arc, those are really fun. I remember using plasma arc when I was a dental assistant, and you don't know how many times I've seen people have pulpal inflammation, stuff like this, because of just the amount of heat it produces. All right, relines. Let's say, for example, you have a restoration like this. This was an actual case. I did the case. I sent it out. About a year later, it comes back needing a reline. That's what it looks like after about a year or so. So the dog did a functional impression. Sorry. functional impression with a, I think this is a CoSoft or something like that, and send that to me. So the thing is that for these type of things, I'd like to use a flask instead of a reline jig, just simply because I think it just works better for this type of restorations. So you box up your impression, you pour it up like regular, and here I flasked it. And what I do is I put putty over the top. And you kind of either open the occlusal surfaces completely, or you do them kind of like this, just so you have a stop. Because when you're closing a flask, it's all putty. If you don't, pressure can move things, and you can have vertical changes and occlusion changes, and you definitely don't want to do that. So you need to have two rigid stops when you're processing things. So open up the flask, take the denture out, clean it up, have your surface prepared. And then what I do is I'll actually reduce the composite on the edge a little bit, just so I'm bonding what? I'm bonding acrylic to acrylic. I know that bond works, right? I know it has a longevity to it. So I'll take the composite down a little bit, and I'll just apply acrylic to it, to acrylic, which you don't have to do a lot, because remember, we don't put composite all the way up to the top, right? We have that 3 to 5 millimeter step. So even with adjustments, you still should have a layer of acrylic right at the very top. But if you have minimal, you just reduce the composite a little bit. And if you do the reline in the flask, you see you don't have a lot of flash if you do it properly. So it makes things a little bit easier to clean up and to fix that composite line right there. So you clean everything up. Okay, so here you see I'm using like this black chocolate kind of paint almost on my teeth. I generally don't do this. I did this a couple of times, and I teach people how to do this technique, because dependent on what type of sandblasting unit you have and sandblasting tip you have, the precision of things is going to be a little bit different. So let's say, for example, you don't want to accidentally abrade your teeth, because you're not going to be glazing those teeth, right? Or if you have like a crown, you don't want to accidentally abrade too much off the glaze off of it, so the composite, the glaze will stick to it. Then you need to protect the teeth. So what I'm basically using here is this stuff. It's called liquid latex. It's sold by I buy this on Amazon. It's not expensive at all. It's for facial, like special effect prosthetics makeup. I just paint it on the teeth, let it cure, and it protects the teeth when I sandblast. Because my sandblaster is really precise. I'm using the Renford Basic, I think. Has very narrow tips, and I can get right to that margin without having to worry damaging the tooth. But if you have issues with your sandblaster, this works really well, and then just peels off at the end. Okay. So I've adjusted everything and adjusted the composite, sandblasted it. I just reglazed it. So that's how you do a reline. So it works fairly easy. And if you don't take off too much composite like I did, I didn't take too much off, so about 1 millimeter or so. You don't need to recomposite things at all. You just reglaze them. So it makes things a lot easier. Okay. So relines for me are not an issue at all. So that'd be the same thing if you're doing a printer restoration. Okay. We had an issue like this where the denture fell and fractured a couple anterior teeth, and I needed to do a repair. And this was obviously a composite denture, so it makes things a little bit more difficult than just simply adding acrylic to it. It would still be more difficult if you added acrylic staining to it, right? Let's say the rest of the denture has an acrylic, not staining, acrylic color customization. Staining is probably not the right term to use here. You would still have to rechange the colors. With composite, it was actually pretty easy. Here's the fracture, grind the broken area out, re-wax the teeth in. I did jig gel. See, I can't talk today. Just to keep everything in place, and then putty matrix for the contours. That's what it looks like. Bonded the teeth with repair with cold cure. So that's one thing. I also, let me mention this. Why have I been using Nature Crow for all these years? For reasons like these. So for my regular everyday type of restorations, they're heat cured. I flask things and I press pack. I'm old school that way, and I'll have heat cure stuff. But when you have situations like this and you have to do a repair, for years, I've been getting repair acrylic that looks completely different than what the heat cure is. With Denture acrylic, the cold cure is exactly the same shade as a heat cure. So if I have to do repair, reline blends in very well. And because I knew the schematic I was using, I mean, I've been doing it long enough to where I know where the colors go. Just reapply the colors once you follow the protocols in composite. Cure that. I sandblasted the whole thing because, you know, you don't want to be applying glaze. You know, like, I'll put it old glaze here and new glaze here. You know, reapply the whole thing. And just reglazed it. Okay. Here's another pair. This is a year, maybe a little bit over a year. Fracture of the anterior tooth. But you see how the glaze looks here? Nothing wrong with the glaze. It's a hygiene issue. Because what I did when I cleaned the denture, when I cleaned it, glaze is fine. Yeah, sure, there's some areas that had problems with it, but they were also we were adjusting things and everything else. You see a little bit of delamination here. Well, because I don't have a margin here. So, you know, the composite kind of went over the butt joint. And I missed it actually myself. So that's why I have issues. But when you have a butt joint of adjustment of acrylic in that region, you're not going to have any issues. Same thing here. You know, I don't have any issues right here by the tooth. But when you look at things, when you clean it, so I just cleaned it and I just retouched it. Yeah, you have some areas that maybe have some issues. But this is why about after 2 years I just reapply it. But initially when you saw things, it was an issue with hygiene of the patient. You see right here, this is what I usually see. You have some areas that it will start to go away. But also, I don't know if it's going away on its own or there was adjustment with pumice or something like that. Usually around these areas, they end up pumicing things. Maybe that's why it's doing it. So what I generally tell my dentist, you know, I'll give you a 2-year warranty on the glaze. After 2 years, we'll just reapply. It takes me 20 minutes. And if something happens within that 2 years things, I reapply it. I don't charge for it. Keeps a good relationship with my doctors and seems to be working fine for me so far. So same thing. Just put a little bit of putty in there to keep the tooth. Gel in place. See, I'm trying not to say jig gel because I don't want to mess up the vocabulary. Repair with acrylic. Sandblast. Reapply composite, and sandblast and reglaze. And that's it for that one. It looks kind of like this when the whole thing's done, upper versus lower. And the denture, I think, is about 2 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Here's another case. This was actually kind of cool. I was using a technique like of duplicating his old denture to make a new upper, and maybe in some later lectures and stuff like this I can go into it further. But I glazed everything. The lower was an immediate. This is why I kind of wanted to show you guys. It's a little overextended, but I guess he was maybe not as overextended as I thought. But the patient wore this for a year, and because it was an immediate, it came back after about a year for reline. He really likes his dentures, has no issues with it, but it came in for reline. And this is what a reline looks like. So this was before. So this is day of delivery. Reline impression looks after. Okay, but if you look closely, you can't see maybe from this angle. There's a fracture in acrylic right here. You see that blue right here? So what happens is that when I was doing it, I didn't really fully think about this. With immediates, you generally do a lot of adjustments because you do bone reductions and stuff like this. So they over adjusted the denture instead of adjusting the bone per alveoloplasty guide. So they kind of did both. They did the bone and whatever they didn't do with the bone, they did with the denture. So the denture was super thin in that region. So the acrylic fractured and composite both fractured in that area. So when I redid things, I actually had to repair that region right here, which I did. I thickened it up a little bit and reglazed it. and composite's holding out pretty well too. Okay, so that was just, you know, regular application. Now if you could get into digital restorations, it gets a little bit different. So this is the case we did. Patient has like microdontia and has some interesting anatomical deviations going on, and it was really difficult to fabricate. So the doctor took some impressions. We poured that up. You see how tiny those are. So we had a hell of a time getting things done, and these were going to be for immediates. So we actually decided to fabricate the prototypes, the temporaries, in digitally printing them. So I box everything up like I always do. And I'll read the comments here in a minute. Boxed it up, type 3 stone. So I actually digitally designed and printed the base plates. Send that in for a bite. So the bite was fabricated like this. We had the one bite for the horizon. And I scanned everything in. And actually, I didn't design this case myself. This was before I kind of knew a little bit more about 3Shape. I actually had, I think the company's name is Full Contour in Arizona. I think they designed this one. It was printed out of, I think this one, the doc printed this one, so he was using NextDent, kind of bridge material. So he just sent it to me, and I did the reduction and everything else, and I did the composite and the glaze. But if you look closely, I don't know if I have another slide. Yeah, I do. If you look closely, the composite only goes up to this far, okay? Because I want to have a butt margin of connecting these two things together. I don't want to have delaminations. But on top it would still be white, right? So I just pretty much used red Optiglaze color and just kind of blended things in. Works pretty well. And I got the color matched pretty well and everything else, and the patient was happy and doctor was happy. Everything went pretty good. Let me just read the comment. Interdental parts sandblasting before adapt Optiglaze and no primer. Yes. So I just sandblast the in proximals and you know, clean everything and steam clean it, and then no primer and just apply the glaze. And light cure for, I use a Light Duo, so I light cure for a minute and a half. With glazes, you know, when you talk about lights, with Optiglaze, you don't necessarily need to have a professional light curing unit. I mean, it's recommended obviously because you want to use things for as the way they're meant to, but it's not a requirement in my opinion. Hopefully, it'll make too many people upset. So the wavelength to cure Optiglaze is around 365 to 405, if I'm not mistaken. So the nail curing lights have the same wavelength. The nail curing lights for nail polish, and they're pretty intense. So they're 36 watts. Okay, and you don't need a lot of intensity to cure the glaze. I mean, it's a very thin coat. I mean, the light passes through it because it's clear, so it will take a little longer, but still plenty of. I've done plenty of testing on this, and it works great. So, so I have no problems with it at all. And I think my thing just went dead. Huh. Hold on, guys. I might have to go live again. What's going on? Does it limit me? Can you guys see me? What's going on? Can you guys see me okay? Can you guys hear me? I'm having some technical issues here with the stream. Can you comment if you're having any issues or not? Okay, sounds good. I don't know, something's up with my computer for some reason. Okay, let me take this off and go back to here. Okay. So what was I talking about? Oh yeah, we were talking about applying Optiglaze into proximally. Sorry guys, I don't know, it frazzled me. I was like, oh god, it's dead. What's gonna happen? No, it seems to be working okay now. I paused it and I started going again. So when you're doing a restoration like this, for example, so I do quite a few of these lately. I shouldn't say quite a few. I mean, I do a couple. Where you have a titanium substructure and you either have like a zirconia or a lithium disilicate crown restorations on a thimble bridge, virtually. So when you apply composite to this, here's a couple of things. So on titanium, you are going to be using either a metal primer. I use a metal primer Z, or you can use a multi-primer. G multi-primer, I think is the name of it, to get the things ready. So you obviously sandblast the titanium, you apply the primer, you let it, air dry. I do 2 coats just to be on the safe side. I do the same thing with just my regular opaquing of the bars. And then once you do that, you will have to opaque it. So the Gradia Plus has opaque base, OB I think it's called, and this is what I was using here. It blocks out pretty well. I do it in 2 coats. I do a wash layer, cure that, and then do a second layer. And once that is done, you don't need to apply anything else because it still has a sticky layer to it. You can start applying composite right on top of it. So there's just a couple of different views of it. So here, like I was saying, like I do opaque and then composite. This is a mixture of number 1 and number 3 of Gradia Plus light body, just to kind of get things started. Also, pastes apply a little bit better over the light body. And then first layer of composite, and then second layer of composite and texture. And then I just sandblasted everything. So here, because I was just using composite, and I was actually using these zirconia crowns, but the zirconia crowns have a ceramic coating on it, because composite doesn't really adhere too greatly to zirconia from what I've read and research that I've done, but it doesn't have too many issues with adhering to ceramic. Okay, so what I'm doing here, just to kind of simplify things for me, I'm just using multi-primer, because with multi-primer I could apply it to metal, I could apply it to ceramic, I could apply it to composite and have no issues. But if you wanted to break things up a little bit, you could just use ceramic primer on this and use metal primer on metal. So because ceramic primer works on Gradia Plus, because it has a highly filled ceramic, right? And it works on the ceramic glaze here. So you paint both of those and then you put glaze and light cure it. If you wanted to have more longevity to it, I would feel pretty confident on this type of restoration using luster paint. If you dilute it enough to where you don't lose detail, same thing. You sandblast the whole surface. You apply ceramic primer to the composite and to the ceramic glaze of the zirconia crowns, and then apply luster paint, and I'm pretty certain you're going to have a really, really good seal. And I think the wear resistance is going to be higher than Optiglaze, personally. So at this point, I think that's what I'm going to start doing. I'm still kind of... It takes me a little bit to kind of get used to things, and I think that's the only reason I haven't done that. But I think it's a superior product for this type of restoration, and the longevity is going to be good, and I just need to make sure that I know the proper primers to use for proper things. That's why I haven't maybe used acrylic primer for printed restoration. That's why I've been using composite primers. That was my only deviation from norm, let's say. Okay, So I mean, you get really nicely aesthetic restorations here. And this case I did with pectin. With pectin, actually, I used a different primer. I used a Bredent primer. This was the only pectin case I did, actually, so I don't even know which primer I would use now on it. But I used the Bredent. I can't even recall the name at this point. I'll have to look that up, guys. If you're interested, let me know. I'll private message you the details. But you same thing. You sandblast the surface, and in this case, we were doing we did lithy crowns on this. So once the crowns were tried in, this is just wax on here at this point. So I covered the areas that I wanted to protect, and I sandblasted everything. I applied the primer, cemented the crowns, and then I sandblasted. You see how I'm like covering crowns part way, just so I get the area sanded, so I can prime it with ceramic primer and get the composite application. This is exactly what happened here. So the first layer, I didn't opaque this at all because it comes in that gray color. I did the first layer of flowables, and then I did the second. I think I did 1 or 2 layers here on top, and then got everything adjusted and glazed. So that's about it for this type of thing. And I think we're going to take a quick 15-minute break. And when I come back, we're going to switch over to our demo portion. And hopefully I'll explain things a lot better then that I'm doing now. And the time, if you guys have any... oh, VisioLink. Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, Mike Cumby just said, we're using... let me just switch this. We're using VisioLink on the pectin framework. So I don't know what I would use now, if GC what GC equivalent for that is or not. But since I don't do pectin, I've actually just been like my thimble bar cases. I've just been doing titanium. It takes a lot of guesswork out of it for me. I'm sure there's. I don't like to badmouth materials. And then when I've done videos before and explained things before, there are areas that things work excellent for, and it has some excellent properties and excellent longevities, but the case has to fit those parameters. Because majority of the cases I do, thimble bar or otherwise, have a large cantilever is just because majority of the doctors have been taught an all-in-4 or an all-in-X. I shouldn't say all-in-4. I don't want to get sued. All-in-X type of technique, you're going to have some sort of a cantilever. And depending on how long the cantilever is, well, the materials are going to be dependent on that. When I'm dealing with a large cantilever, titanium works well. It has for years. We've seen the results of it, so I just kind of go with that. Other materials like pectin, for example, it has really great shock absorbency. But, with a long cantilever, you're going to have issues. Possibly. I haven't done enough of these to be like, no, you shouldn't use this. But I'm saying like things I've heard. So that's why I kind of do things. I work with things that kind of work for me. I'm not bad mouthing things at all here. Please don't feel that way. But yeah. So with titanium, I use metal primer or multi-primer. Those are the two ones I use. Metal primer Z apparently works on the... Z stands for zirconia, apparently, from what I've been told. So it should also work on zirconia as well. But since I'm bonding composite mostly to either composite glaze or to the I started reading Mike Cumby's comment and I lost my train of thought. Mike, how dare you? How dare you do this to me? What was I saying? Oh yeah, since I applied the composite just to either metal or to the ceramic, then I just don't usually have any need for the Z part of things. But both metal primer Z and the G multi primer, they have the MDP in it, so this should work for a zirconia right there. So Mike says we actually just recommend using an opaque or LB flowable after proper surface treatment of pectin and peak. Put that thin application on that and tack it, and then proceed with your build. Oh, so not even using a primer. Oh, that's kind of cool. Nice. to wear a dress for the bunny. Dude, not now. You can't make me laugh during these things. All right, let's take a 10-15 minute break, and I'll see you back here for the demo portion. Okay, thanks guys. Okay, guys, so we're gonna switch over to the demo table, and actually, let me just switch completely to the demo table like this. All right, can everybody hear me okay? Can everybody see okay? Any issues with the sound? Hopefully I'm not too quiet, not too loud. Hopefully everything's going good. All right, so first thing I wanted to show you guys is how I apply Opaque onto the bars. So this is generally what type of bars I deal with. Just a titanium bar. And what you see I'm doing here is I'm using actually a guide pin and an analog. And what I generally do is I'll apply an analog first, and then I will just put some heat shrink tubing over the top. This is a 5mm diameter heat shrink tubing, and seal that up. And what we'll do is I'll actually protect the areas from sandblasting and everything else. A lot of times I'll have tubing on these pins as well, but in my case, I didn't do this here. I actually just used the old analogs with tubing, because you can actually see still the what are they called? Pieces of Opaque still on there. Okay, so first things first, I'm using the metal primer Z, and I'm going to apply it over the area that I'm going to be applying my primer to. Okay. And I'm just covering all the surfaces that I'm going to be doing. I'm actually going to do only half the bar, so I don't need to apply it to the whole thing. So I'm just going to go about to the midline. Since we're not actually delivering this case, it's not an actual patient case, it's just the bar that I have laying around. We don't need to spend more time than we need to on this, getting things applied. This stuff has a bit of a smell to it a little bit, so enjoy it. I do. Makes it for a better day. Okay, so I do my first coat, let it air out, and then I'll pour some more in there. It's highly volatile, so it evaporates really quickly. So you might have to refill your vat a couple of times. And then we're just going to do a second coat. Just like that. Everybody hear me okay? Can everybody see me okay? No? Yes? Am I just talking to myself? Okay, good. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. To put some music on, so it just won't be me talking, but like the top 40 or something like that. Okay, so that should be sufficient. Just gonna wipe this off. I'm using a heavy plastic non-reactant container for this, but these primers, especially this one, man, it's so aggressive that I've used some of these cheapo, these ones, sorry, I'm out of frame, these cheapo little disposable dampen dishes, and it ate through it before I was able to apply stuff to it. It actually ate through it. It was part of the primer, so be careful with it. This stuff is like, it's good. Once you see what it does to plastic, you know it's good for the metal. Okay, now I just have to remember which side I applied it to. Okay, I remember. So I want to be applying primer to the areas that that I don't want to be, that haven't been primed. Okay, so there's usually three opacers that I use. 1, 2, and the 1. Apparently, no. There's 1, 2, and there's also the opaque base. But since we're not using opaque base today, I don't need to worry about it. I usually use opaque base when I'm using composite right over the titanium structure. In this case, I generally use acrylic, so I'm just going to use acrylic opacers. The color that I like the most that I've been able to achieve was mixing 50% of 1 and mixing 50% of 2. It's just I've had good results with that. To me, that's the color that I like the best. Obviously, with you guys, whatever you guys think is working for you, go ahead and do that. But to me, this is the color that I like. Okay, it works well. So at this point, the primer has evaporated completely, and I can go ahead and start applying my wash layer of the opaque. So you basically what you're doing is you're just thinly covering the metal. You don't need to block out the color just yet. What you're doing, you're pretty much like I don't know, priming the surface, priming the canvas, which is not exactly the right term to use here because we just used the metal primer. I don't know, it just prepares the surface, smooths it out evenly, and kind of lets things adhere better. I don't know, it's just whenever we worked with opakers, there's always been a wash layer and there was a second or third layer from that point on. So this is our wash layer. So you see I'm just thin coat all the way through. Get a little piece of something stuck in there. I like this opaque better than the first opaques that we were using. So the Gradia system has opakers as well, but theirs are a bit more thick, and what I've used in the past with that system is I've used the composite primer to dilute the opaque to get the results I wanted, which worked out pretty well actually. But with this I don't need to do any kind of dilution or anything. It's great straight out of the straight out of the tube. So right this, and that's another reason why I have usually have heat shrink on top of this, just to protect the pins and maybe protect the sides a little bit so it doesn't go in. But the problem with using heat shrink tubing, sometimes if you put a lot of opaquer and it hits the heat shrink too much, when you go to take off the heat shrink, it can break off a part of the opaque. So I don't like doing that, and especially if you have it covered first, when you're applying the primer, the area won't be primed, and when you go to break off the tubing, it can actually break off the parts of the opaque around the tube as well, in the areas that weren't primed. So there's like some negative things with that. But overall, it works out pretty well. I mean, it bonds well, and I did some testing on that. It just works a lot better than just simply opaquing things. I'm showing you my entire technique for opaquing with using the acrylic fibers. It was taught to me by a couple of friends actually. Mark Chan, he's a denturist out of Canada, was telling me the whole protocol of this, and Arian was also actually Deutsch, had something to do with it. There's been so many people in my life that have been instrumental for me learning things that to mention everybody by name is going to be close to impossible. So to all of you guys, I thank you immensely. It's been wonderful to learn from you and to keep learning from you. So thank you for the impact that you have had on my career and my life. I've been truly blessed to have friends and teachers like you. One thing you've noticed about me, I don't generally like to go fast. Every time I try to go too fast, I end up missing details. So I try to slow things down. But today I will go a little bit faster because obviously I don't want to spend the whole day here making you guys fall asleep. Because if I had like music going or something, maybe it would be a little bit better. Actually, you know what? When we take a break next time, maybe I'll turn a little bit of music in the background just to make things a little bit more interesting for you. That's what actually happens when I teach my classes. When we do hands-on classes, we actually do have music playing in the background when people are doing these things. I'll just leave that like this, I think. It should be okay. All right. If you guys have questions, even if it's not about this thing that I'm doing right now, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll be more than happy to answer. I still remember the Optiglaze question on longevity of things, and I think I've answered it partially, but if I haven't answered all of it, please let me know. On hybrids, I still get the same, you know, about 2-year longevity on it. But usually when they come in for a cleaning, I think it's a good idea when the patients come in for a cleaning just to get that thing reglazed if you want, if you have that ability. Okay, so I did my first layer of the opaque, and I'm just going to light cure it. I'm placing it in the Labolite Duo for just 1 minute. So I'm using this little stand, and I like about this stand, it's got little peg places to it. So if I just manipulate my heat shrink just good enough, sometimes it takes some. There you go. So I can just put it in there, and I'll put it in, and after about a minute, this will be good and ready for my application of the second layer of the opaque. Feels good. I'm drinking coffee at the same time, and you guys can't see me. So I don't know why I just admitted that. I could have just totally hidden it from you, but I guess I feel like I can talk to you guys. 30 more seconds and we'll be ready to go for our next step. So once I do the second layer, I'm actually not going to cure it right away. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, like we talked about, I'm going to apply my acrylic powder to it. And what it's going to do is actually going to trap those fibers inside that wet opaque. So we have our bar. So now we're going to apply our second layer, just like I talked about. And this one's going to go on a little bit thicker. You obviously want to hide that color, and you can do, you know, a couple of coats. If you wanted to, you can do a second coat and then cure that one, and do third coat with the acrylic primer. Acrylic powder. I usually do powder on the second coat, and if I need to, I'll add more opaque and more powder on the third coat. That's what I generally do if there's a spot that's showing through. But just because I think it's just better to have more room for the fibers to get trapped into. You know what I mean? Because if I did this coat and then I cured it and I did another coat, then the top coat is going to be thinner than this one, and the fibers won't trap as well. Okay. And some people will go in and maybe just round these edges out a little bit. I have never done that, and I never had any issues. I'm sure, I mean, scientifically it will be better for acrylic fractures and all that stuff. But honestly, over the years, we've always been kind of using this L-shaped design. And my opinion, if you have proper amount of room, which is 2mm of acrylic all the way around, then you don't have issues with fractures, even if you have an edge like this. I think that edge kind of helps to lock things in. Personally, I do. But I don't generally argue on this subject matter because I just simply don't have enough anecdotal evidence on both sides to have pros and cons. I'm just simply thinking out loud. I definitely don't want it to be round because I don't want kind of rotational forces allowing acrylic just to flip all the way. But I think it's, you know, if you have a little bit of a less of a sharp edge there, maybe it would be better. But like I said, I'd never had issues before, so I am not doing it. Right there. You know what, I'm not going to do the underside. I just don't. First of all, I need to add more opaquer, and I just simply think we're going to be wasting too much valuable time if we're going to be just opaquing this all the way through. So I showed you the underside with the wash layer. I think that should be sufficient enough. I think I might still need to add more opaquer anyways. Yeah. Let me just mix some more. And I keep my stand right here for these purposes, so I can spend 4 hours trying to put that in there. There we go. So I can just take a little bit more and mix it in if I need to without having to drop this. What also works well, I'll show you here in a minute. They have this these tweezers you can buy that have will stand to them, so you can grab that and use it, because this opaque is still wet. I don't want to it hitting the top of the table, you know, and kind of ruining things. All right. Just like this. We'll leave the underside as is. Okay. What I do now is I don't cure this just yet. I'm going to take my powder, whichever powder you're using. In my case today, I think I grabbed some original shade Nature Curl fiber stuff. But all you do is you simply, kind of like salt and pepper technique, simply sprinkle it right on top. And what happens is that the powder is getting trapped in the wet surface of the opaque, which is great because you have the chemical retention, right? Chemical adhesion of the opaque to the metal once it cures, and then you have the mechanical retention of the fibers to the opaque. So when you go to actually cure acrylic on top of this, it will have both mechanical and chemical retention as well, which just creates a much stronger bond, in my opinion, because I did some testing and it looked like it was stronger. Because when you try to break things apart, if you don't do this sprinkle technique, acrylic usually just breaks off from the opaque. But if you do the sprinkle technique, it breaks off together from the metal and takes a lot more force. And I do this a couple of times because what happens is just the moisture will absorb the acrylic, and then it will seep through a little bit, and then I just add more to it. And I think we got just about right. And also the added benefit to this is oftentimes when I used to do opaques, if you cure it but you don't wipe off the top layer, and the top layer usually was like leftover pigment, because you had the the matrix and the pigment. When things cured, sometimes there was a bit of a pigment still left on top, and you had to wipe that off, because if you didn't, when you go to process acrylics, you ended up having that pigment flow in the acrylic and just kind of look messy. But with this, it kind of locks everything in place, and you don't have to worry about any of that pigmentational changes. Okay, so I think this is pretty good. Just blowing off the excess here. Okay, and now I'm just going to cure that. Actually, I'm going to cure this for 3 minutes, because to me that's a final cure. And at that point should be good to go. And if you need to go back in and reapply things a little bit, it's not a problem. Just do the same thing, just apply a little bit more, not primer, but the opaque, wet opaque, and just sprinkle more powder to it, and then you're ready to go. Okay. While this is happening over there, let me put this aside. And let's talk a little bit about our composites. So here I'm using a heated palette, which they don't manufacture in this form. This one was made by me. I took a Renford palette with a stone slab, and I've adhered a coffee warmer, USB coffee warmer, to the bottom of it. So it heats things up pretty well, about 50 degrees Celsius. I usually use this one for when I travel. When I'm here at home, I use this. It just plugs in. It has two settings, 40, 45, and 50. This is more precise. This one's better when you're displaying things, when you're teaching things, because it's got a bigger surface area. But at home, I use something like this. I bought this on eBay. I think it costs about 70 bucks. You can have better versions of these. Obviously, going to be more expensive, but this is the one I did. This one didn't stay in very well. I had to put a little bit of putty, so this plate didn't rotate too much. So hopefully I'll be able to get it back in. Because it just would spin around. But like this, it works pretty well. Okay. So the first case we're going to be working on is a digital denture. So this one I actually didn't do reduction digitally. I did this. No, I did do reduction digitally. Sorry, I'm lying. I'm a big liar. I did the reduction on this side, because you can see there's a lip right here. And then I went in, that's the reason I got confused, because I didn't see the lip on the bottom. I actually went back in and I reduced right at the tooth area by hand. Okay, so I used the printed resin from Dreve, I don't know the proper name to pronounce it. The resin was provided to me by Julian from Swiss NF, and big thanks to him. And the teeth I'm using here are Vigo teeth from Vita. These are the new ones. So I designed the case digitally, printed the base, already reduced on one side, bonded the teeth in, and then went back in and just adjusted the marginal region zone of things. Okay. Now our bar at this point is fully opaque. Well, except this side, I didn't touch this side. But you see how the surface is? It just got nice kind of a rough surface with acrylic powder on top of it. So it's going to make things a lot easier to bond to it. So this is my technique pretty much for all of my acrylic bars. Now, if you're doing a composite bar, you wouldn't do this. So usually I don't use pink. I usually use white. Also because, you know, you have crowns, it just looks, the color looks better. And now I'll use the same metal primer, but use the 2 or 3 layers of the white opaque on top of this if I'm doing like a thimble bar or something like that. Okay. Any questions on this one? We're all good? All right. Now let's talk about a heated palette. Why is my palette heated? Why do I need to heat my palette? When I started doing composites a while ago, my understanding was like if you heat the composites, they do flow better, they adapt better, but the problem is when they're hot, they don't texture good, right? And because every time I would apply composite to my denture, I ended up having issues with texturing, you know. So I started doing things like putting it in the fridge after application just so I could texture it better, and some other techniques, stuff like this. But a buddy of mine in Russia would heat his composites all the time and get excellent results. I was like, okay, fine, maybe I'll try this. So what happens actually when you heat the composite, it's 50 degrees Celsius on here, and it's nice and flowable. But the moment you pick it up from here, it starts to cool down. So when you apply it here, it's still kind of warm and it adapts good to the surface. You have a really good adaptation to the surface. But then it's cooling down to the 22 degrees Celsius in here, and it actually becomes stiffer and becomes easier to texture. So I was like, wow, that's great. So now I always heat my composites. Unfortunately, I don't make them in this size. I've retrofitted a couple. I have a really nice smile line tray for composites, and I try to retrofit that. It's just the connection, because it's so thin, the connection kind of would fall apart all the time, so that's why I retrofitted this one. But like I said, this is mostly for travel. Okay, now since this is a printed restoration, I'm going to use my composite primer on this. But if this was just a regular acrylic, I would definitely use this, the acrylic primer, because it works great on that. But since I don't know what's exactly in here, what kind of additives they have, I'm going to use my composite primer. Okay. So the surface was reduced, adjusted, sandblasted, steam cleaned, hot air dry. So it's completely nice and clean, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to put a glove on. So I'm going to use a gloved hand, just so when I'm working with this, I am not going to create any issues with contaminating things with my dirty fingers. Okay. So first things first, you need to apply your primer, and for that you can use these dishes that are fine. They're not going to get melted or anything like that. They work pretty well. Just a couple of drops should be enough. And you want to make sure you're using clean brushes. So what I generally do is I have one of these alcohol little things that I keep around, and every time I use on something, I'll just clean it up. So like if I was using this for an opaquer, I'll clean it up, and I'll just wipe it on something dry like this, and set it aside and grab another brush while this one's drying, okay? So this one's, not sure if this one was clean or not. Do I have a clean one here? Yep, I do. Okay. So here, I'm just going to grab my primer. And on one screen, I'm showing that my link went dead, but on the other one, it looks okay. So I don't know what's going on. Because I have an app running on my iPad, and it shows like it stopped transmitting, but the actually on the internet on my screen on the computer, it shows that we're doing okay. So if you guys see something, if it's not working, you might need to re-upload on your tablet or phone, which I just realized some of you might not hear me, but you probably have figured that out by now. So I'm just applying it all over the surface that I'm going to be applying. I don't need to apply it on the teeth, just at the margin, okay? Because I'm not going to be applying composite on the teeth, right? Okay, so it looks something like this. So at this point, I need to light cure this for 1 minute. So I'm going to put this in my Libel I Do and light cure it for 1 minute. All right. Any questions? Any problems with the stream? Everybody can see me okay still, hopefully, because I can see me on my computer. So I don't think there's any issues. Okay. Now, the colors that come with the kit, you're going to have your light bodies and you're going to have your heavy bodies. So your light bodies are going to be Gum Light Body 1, Gum Light Body 2, and Gum Light Body 3, as well as the clear, okay? And the same thing with heavy bodies. You'll have 1, 2, and 3, and clear. The things that I use mostly are going to be 1, 2, and 3. These are my go-to colors in my heavy bodies. Okay, this is what I generally use, these three. Okay, if I need to adjust the colors, if I need to make new colors, I usually mix these three, and I will add, what I will add into those colors is I'll actually add luster paints. Okay, so I actually did this morning. So by mixing different luster paints into my acrylics, into my, not acrylics, not what I'm smoking today, into my composites, I'm able to achieve all these different results. So oftentimes we're asked, like, what do I do if I have a patient that's got ethnic gingiva? This has been a quite often case lately. I've been asked this question a lot. So what I generally use here is that my Nature Crow comes in 3 darker shades, and they're called mild, moderate, and heavy. So 20, 21, and 22. Okay, I don't usually use 20 because it just doesn't look that much darker than I need to, but obviously it can be used for that. The 2 go-to shades are 21 and 22. The one that I use is 21 most of the time. Okay, this is my go-to shade. Okay, but then if you look right here, none of my obviously 1, 2, and 3 colors are obviously going to be too pink, so I need to get the colors like these to be applied to that, for example. So a couple of combination of things that works really well. So the if you take on, for example, violet luster paints, really nice color, and also lavender is a nice color, but we're going to use violet in this case. And if you take my number 1 color, which is going to be your most red one, okay, take some of this. I'm going to take my favorite spatula. Big fan of Composite Instruments by Smileline. I'll just be honest with you. Had a great relationship with these guys over the years. Chris is awesome. Okay, so you see how I apply it to the heated palette, and just absolutely right away it just becomes nice and pliable, like really, really soft. So it makes things a lot easier to mix, right? So by simply applying a little bit of violet luster paint and mixing things around, you get a different color, obviously. And that's the way the system was designed. I mean, they have the 3 basic colors that they sell, and then simply by addition of other things to it, you can create the shade that you need. So if I need this to be a little bit more violet, it's not a problem. Just add a little bit more. And I get what I need right here. I'll be able to incorporate that into my other colors. So I can either use this on its own, or I can mix this in with other colors and to get the color that I want. It makes things work a lot better. All right. Oops. Just make sure I still have. Yeah, looks like we're still live. That's good. All right. So that's for this violet, and I'm actually going to be able to use this now. But let's say, for example, I want to have, you know, a more a brownish color like this, right? So the red that comes in the luster paints here, it's a different kind of red. It's not the red that I'm used to. They call it bright red, but it's got a little bit more of a almost brownish look to it, I think. So when you mix that together with other colors, you can get a really nice brown. Just move this back so I don't make a mess. So let's say, for example, let me grab a piece of this so you guys can see a little bit better. So if I'm going to get the red here, see how it's got that little brownish look to it? When you spread it, you can really see it, I guess. Okay. So if I mix that with, let's say I'm going to grab a D shade luster paint, and I mix that together, almost get like a chocolate look to it, right? So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just show you guys what I do. I'm probably not going to use this color. I'm going to use the violet, but I'm not going to use this one. But just so you guys know what to do when you get a case where you need to be using darker colors. So once again, I'm going to use my number 1, which is my darkest paste that I have. And if you need to go lighter, you go either 2 or 2 or 3. But also, if you need more translucency, all you do is you add a little bit more clear to things, and it's going to give you the translucency that you need. But for now, I'm going to add my red. And I'm going to add my D. I'm going to mix all this in. And the way I actually have this palette set up, it's hotter here and cooler there. I got my hot zones and I got my cool zones. But by simply mixing this in, I'm getting the colors that I want. So this is more brown. Okay. And if I want this to be more violet brown, I can even take a little bit more of my violet. You have to just go slowly. Don't go too quickly, because if you add too much color at once, it's just going to create the color that you don't want. It's going to be too saturated. It's going to be too violet, not enough brown kind of thing. So go slowly, just kind of see things. You know, I'm going to add a little bit more. You get the recipe that you want, and then you can just write this stuff down, you know, how much percentage wise I'm using of each material to get the results that I want. And then that's what you get. Sorry, I'm going to add a little bit more violet from this one. That looks about what I want. So that's just how easy it is to get the colors that you need for your restorations. And what to do, they actually, in the kits, they have little cartridges you can use to kind of fill up. And you can actually put this in that cartridge and reuse it later if you need to. Which is what I'm going to do, because I don't need it for this restoration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this right here. And I'm going to grab I was going to grab it, but I can't remember where I put it. Oh well. I was going to grab, oh, it's right here. So you get these little cartridges right here. Which you can just drop on the floor. Sorry. So you just take this. See, it's already started to cool. And you just fill in your cartridge. And then it's got like a little plunger. You put in there. Just clean the sides off. And you can just use a little stopper. So now when I need, you know, in a case where I'm doing ethnic shade, I can just take this out of the fridge or whatever and use it on that case. And living in Utah, I don't really do a lot of cases like that, but I do work with a prosthodontist out of in Texas and stuff like this, so I've done a few cases. All right, well, this is just the colors that I got just by mixing those different luster paints and getting the results that I wanted. So it's fairly easy to achieve. You just need to know your color theory a little bit. And for me, I don't know anything about color theory, I'll be honest with you. So what I do is that when I'm trying to learn some things, YouTube, colors, how to mix colors. There's painters from all over the world, you know, just showing their techniques and stuff like this, and they're just excellent at what they do. So there's no shortage of information out there at all on stuff like this. So I highly recommend you guys try them. And if you have any questions on it down the line, you can always just private message me, and I'll make sure to answer as much as I know to help you guys out. So, but it is fairly easy to do. Just clean this up a little bit so I don't have the color mixture thing going on. All right, so we have our number one, which is going to be our most red. right here. We have our number 2. Where did I put number 2? Sorry. Give me a sec. It's right here. So it goes from darkest to lightest on this system. So 1's the most red, and 3 is the most light. And 2's got a little bit of I've got a violet to it. So it's a little bit of a different. And supposedly the light bodies match the shades of the heavy bodies. They kind of do, but not exactly. And I think it has to do with the fact that you know, the consistency of the colors is a little different. So if you look right here, so got light body and heavy body. This one's color is a little bit more saturated, just because of the liquidity of things, I think. So, and then you can just mix things by percentages to get what you need. And I've kind of made like a 50-50, 75-50, just to get the results that I want to. So I oftentimes, what I will do, see how nice and soft that gets. I'll mix my 1 and 3 together, and I'll mix my 1 and 2 together. So if you take my 1, yeah, Mike, I can do that. That's not a problem. I can show you which colors you need to get the other effects. I mean, the Mike Cumby was asking me if I'm going to tell you guys which luster paint colors I used to get the other effects on that demo piece. I actually have a little sheet right here I was mixing earlier today. You can kind of see what it is, so I can go over this sheet a little bit. It's actually pretty much the same, almost the same combination of colors, just the amounts of colors were a little bit different. Okay, so let me go back here and mix my colors a little bit more. So 1 and 2, and obviously 50-50 is going to get you a little bit different than, you know, 50 and 75 and 25, like right here, for example. You can get a ton of different colors just by doing this. Okay, and we're going to do the same thing with 1 and 3. It's going to be a little bit lighter. So this is going to be usually around the areas of, you know, rudimentation, stuff like this. So like that. Maybe just a little bit more. This, it's not too light. Okay, so the mixture of 1 and 2 is what I usually use around the free gingiva. And this is around eminentia. This is more in the proximal. This and this is more in the regions of the vascularity, where you're using in the mucosa and stuff like that. So we have our denture primed and cured. If you have a surface that's too wet, you can always take a clean glove and just go over it to wipe off the extra excess, as long as you don't use dirty fingers. But now at this point, actually I like to use this smaller spatula right here also. You can start applying your colors. So I'm going to use number 1 to go right into interproximals. Just like that. On both sides of the tooth. I'm going to need a brush here. These ones are clean already. Okay. I work with a couple of different instruments. I don't have a set standard for instruments. It also depends highly on how the composite is behaving that day, or how I'm behaving that day, or what I have next to my hands. I have quite a few different things that I'm using. Sometimes I'm using brushes, sometimes I'm using spatulas, sometimes I'm using silicone instruments, or something that I've made on my own, you know, things like that. And I'm just going to show you guys one technique, and then we can deviate from that. So this is number 1, just pure number 1. we got a mix of either 50-50 or 75-25 of number 2. I'll actually use both, just so I can kind of get, see, I hate when this happens. There we go. At the free gingival region. And that's what's great about, this one's a little bit more opacious, and I like that because, some of these printed resins are a bit translucent, and I want to hide things like the margin, for example, right here. And I'm able to do that by using this composite. Okay, so I have the, obviously the lighter one is going to be the 50-50, and the darker one's going to be 75-25. So I'm going to use a little bit darker one right here on my region where it's kind of going closer to the interproximals, just because it's kind of the area where it's you have the most adaptation between the colors, right? I don't like having a straight a line between the colors. I wanted to have like a transition. That's why I don't cure the colors right away too, because I like to have things going in a smooth direction. Okay, sorry, I tend to lose my train of thought sometimes when I talk and I work at the same time, because I get so into my actual case, because I really enjoy doing this. I'll be honest with you. This is I've been having a lot of fun working with composites over the years. It's been very therapeutic to me as well, and because of that, I try to kind of get in the groove, get in the zone, and next thing I know, I'm just sitting there silently, just kind of working away, and it kind of becomes an issue when you're teaching things to people, and they're like, "Hey, dude, are you gonna talk to us, or are we just gonna sit here and pretend and you're gonna pretend we don't exist?" So I'm going to add a little bit of that mixture of 1 and 3 right here at the eminentias. Just like that. And you see, as soon as I start taking it off the palette, it starts to become stiffer, and it becomes a lot easier to get things adapted. And here I'm using 1 again. So I'm just going to mix things up a little bit, so it's just kind of going into slight transition, and I'll add a little bit more 3 in the area just to get a little bit more eminencia showing. Okay, just like that. All right. And here at the very top, you see I'm also using my glove as a cleaning instrument. To the very top, I'm going to use a little bit more violet because it's more vascular and things. I think it just looks a lot better that way. I'm going to mix it together with the red. But not on the palette. I'm mixing it like right here. Okay? I'm going to transition it like this. Okay? It's working pretty well. And now I need to add a little bit more 3 because I don't show enough eminencia, which is fine because I can just do this. And now I'm showing just enough. Okay. That's how I pretty much do each tooth. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing here. A little bit lighter mixture, which is 50% of number 2 and 50% of number 1. If I can never get it on the denture. Come on. Okay, in approximately we're going to go, already did in proximal, sorry. Now we're going to be blending these areas with interproximals using a 25% number 2 and 75% number 1. Right there. Okay, now we're going to use our 50-50 mixture of number 1 and number 3. Just like that. Okay, going to use a little bit more red right here. to blend things in a little bit. So my number one is the one I use a lot because I mix it with a lot of other colors. So that's the one I usually run out of the most. So what I generally order is I order 1, 2, and 3. I use light bodies as well, but not as often as you might think. Come on, you can do this. Here we go. Okay. Just going back and forth a little bit and just checking to make sure that we have enough information and everything, because I'm going back and forth on screens. I want to make, because I have a screen right here that's showing me my camera look, and I have a screen behind me that's showing me the look of what it looks like on YouTube, and also I have a look that's showing me the chat right in front of me. Okay, just like this. And now we're going to take my violet that I mixed earlier with my number one, a little bit more number one, not this one, this one. Just add things in there and blend them all together. Just like this. All right, let's see what we got here. That's exactly what I wanted. See, I always tell you guys this is exactly what I wanted, because even if it's not exactly what I wanted, I don't want to look like I don't know what I'm doing. So you're always going to hear me say, that's exactly what I wanted. Okay. It's shaping up pretty good. Got some nice decent colors. You can put more accents into this if you want. You can use a little bit of Optiglaze and use it as internal staining, for example, just to get like maybe a couple of little red veins. We might do that too. But with K9, it's a little bit different because the aggressivity of the root is a little bit more pronounced. So I want to make sure that I don't miss that. There we go. Just applying a little bit of red. All right. Same thing for gingerbread. And oftentimes when I teach composite techniques, I tell people to hold their denture like this because of the flowability of composite. You don't want it flowing interproximally, but with this material, it's not really an issue. It kind of stays in place really well. So I don't generally have issue with this flowing on the teeth at all, unless I place it on the teeth by accident. So with this one, I don't really need to worry about too much about keeping it downward. So if you see me doing that and you're like, well, you just taught us differently. No, with this particular composite, it's no longer an issue. Still an issue with Optiglaze, so you still have to be careful there, but no longer an issue with this. Alright, so we're going to have to use up all of our 50-50 mix of 1 and 3 for the rudimentia here, just like that. It's looking nicely. Make sure I blend this well. I want to have a nice transition. You know how the colors, they just kind of dissipate and not aggressively shine through? That's what I like to see. I might need to grab a little bit more red. Might not have enough here. Give me a second, guys. Oh man, just squoze out all my violet onto my desk here by accident. Give me a second. Clean up, aisle 5. If I didn't make a mess, it wouldn't be me. It's just the way that things goes. See, like I was telling you guys, I use mostly number 1 quite a bit. It's the one I use the most. There we go. This is my base color for the mixing. To add a little bit more 3 here, just to make this a little bit more extending out of eminentia. Just like that. Now I'm going to use my violet right here. And red with it as well. So the reduction on this was about 1 millimeter. Well, not about 1 millimeter, it was exactly 1 millimeter because that's what its setting was in the mesh mixer. So you can definitely do less. You can do 0.5 millimeter easily on this. So just FYI. I honestly don't know why I did millimeter, because I did 0.5 millimeter on the other one and it looks really good. So I just probably got this done first and didn't think about it and just never got it changed. I think I remember why I did 1 millimeter on this. I was worried that the base was too translucent and I wanted to hide it a little bit better. That's why I did 1 millimeter. But I think 0.5 millimeter would have worked here fairly well and would have had to use less composite. Okay, I'm actually not going to do a full denture. I'm just going to do this premolar. I'm going to leave those 2 there just so you guys can see the difference between, you know, not reduced, reduced and filled, and then not filled. So it can be like a little, I don't know, display piece. Just turn this on. For some reason my iPad turned off. There we go. Right there. Do I have any more of this? Yeah, just enough for this 1 tooth left. So once again, number 1, 50-50 mixture of number 1 and number 2, 75-25 mixture of number 1 and number 2 right here. Okay, and then this one I'm gonna have to mix more. So I get 50-50 of 1 and 3. Actually, you know what? It's probably gonna be more like 60. Oops. Yeah, it's 60 or even 70. 1 and 3, because it's just way too light otherwise, in my opinion. There we go, that's better. Okay. I might actually write a little bit more on top of this just to hide it a little bit better. I'm going to use my red right here. Just kind of blend things in. And the rest of my violet. Mix here. No, I don't need the rest. Less than what I thought I need. There we go. That's good. Blend this in. Actually, I was right the first time. I might need the rest of it after all. There we go. It's looking pretty good. Just gonna be slightly more aggressive. Start adapting things a little bit better at the free gingival margin. I mean, obviously this lip is a little too aggressive. I mean, I would have polished this down a little bit more if this was an actual delivering this actual case. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. There we go. Gonna leave this right here. Okay, now I'm gonna take my brush. This is done. Take my brush and I'll start kind of adapting things a little bit better, because I don't want things in the areas that I don't want them in, and I want things in the areas where I want them. I don't know if that makes any sense, but this is the way that it is. You see how the colors kind of, I don't know if you can see them in this light, but the white is there, the pink is there, the purple is there, but they're not all like, oh, there's white, there's pink, there's purple. No, they're more subtle. Because when I started doing this in the beginning, when I first started doing composites and things, I was like, okay, I need to make sure that you see my white colors from like a mile away and the pinks and everything else. And it looked, which I thought looked great at the time, in reality it kind of looked like junk because it looked too aggressive. And now things look a lot more subtle. I still think I have quite a bit of room for improvement, but I think at least I'm on the right track. But you see how the composite didn't flow on the teeth? Because it just stays so well how it's placed. Just like this. And I'm able to texture just by using a brush. I don't need a specific instrument for texturing anymore. So just brush alone will handle what I need. I'll be honest with you, when this first came out, I was a bit apprehensive. I was like, I don't know, man, these are not the colors that I'm used to. Because I already know the schematic that I'm doing with my the Gradia system. I've been using it for 6 years, or for that time it was like 4.5 years or something like this. Like, I know how things work, I know how things last, I know what to put, where to put it, and how things are going to work out. This, I got to start from the beginning and get things worked out. So I'm like, I don't know, man. But slowly but surely, once I got everything lined up, it started to work out pretty well. All right. So this is about where I want to be. What did Mike say? You're making me want to rig up a heated tray. There we go. Easy peasy. Heater, not duct tape. This is gaffer's tape. Got some telephone wire connections and good to go. Makes things a lot easier to do. They're not that. I'm just surprised that not a company out there makes these. I mean, these work so well for what we need to, and there's going to be a lot of people doing composites and in the coming years, because you know digital is coming quickly and through everywhere. So I think it's going to be a necessity pretty soon. Okay, so if I want to do like a little accent with Optiglaze, I generally try to trap it in places. So let's say, for example, I've got a little bit of red right here, and I have a nice little sharp instrument that I can kind of make like a score line in there. Let's say, for example, we want to do something like right here. Okay, so I can just use a really thin brush. So if you guys see my like loops on top of my balding head coming through. I apologize. It's just I have been planning on using my other loops, which have a much longer working distance, but they just don't seem to want to line up today, and I ended up using these ones, so I do apologize for that. So see, I kind of embed that in there and to create some more vascularity. Okay. Once you do this, once this is all lined up, I'll leave this like this. Double check, make sure your margins are nice and clean. Okay. At this point, I have a nice texture. This is what I wanted to have. And now I'm just going to cure this. So I'm going to cure it for 1 minute first, just so everything freezes in place. And then I will cure for 3 additional minutes once I apply the air barrier. Or in my case, the air barrier that I like to use is this Spectre 360 electrode gel. I don't know, I've just been a big fan of this particular thing. It just goes on nice and smooth and cleans off really easy and seems to get rid of everything. But if you have an ability, you know, to do that, or you can go ahead and do that. If you don't, just buy the air barrier stuff that's sold in the kits. Just make sure you don't use anything like petroleum gel, because that's going to screw things up quite a bit. This is water-based, so it cleans off really easy. Okay, so you see now that this is, I froze the colors in, but they're still sticky, right? So this is what you do. You apply the air barrier like this. Just make sure you cover everything that you've applied composite to. But you see how the composite just hides those margins nice and well? You can't even tell this denture was printed at this point, because the teeth are actual carded teeth, and the proximals are well placed and hidden. If I was gonna like finish this up, glaze it, and take a picture, I don't think you could tell that this was a printed denture, personally. Okay, 3 minutes. Let me change my glove out. All right, Mike, you wanted to know the color combinations that I was using. So if you look, so these are pretty much 50-50 mixes of red and lavender, blue and violet, red and gray, violet and lavender, violet and gray, red and D. Now I showed you red and D, and then red and blue. So so red and gray is the one is. So this was red and lavender. This one's red and gray. Let me see if we can mix that up for you guys, so you can see what's going on. So hopefully I still have a little bit of my violet. And then we have my red. So we're going to use number 1. A little bit of red. And where's my gray? Here's my gray. Right there. And just mix that together. So this was the other color. It's looking pretty nice. I like this one because it's pretty close to this. maybe a little bit more aggressive. And you can dilute this, obviously. You can always like add a little bit of 2 or 1 and just compare things this way, the way you need to. Okay. And then this one has a lot more violet to it. So if I was using, for example, I think this was right here, number 1. I can't remember what this was. This was, I think, mixture of what I showed you plus violet. Let me check. I'm not 100% sure. Just gonna double check this real quick. Give me a second, guys. Yeah, so this one is that same mixture plus violet. And I think the last one is you just add more violet to this mixture. If I add more violet, where is it? Right here. It's going to become darker like this. Obviously, I mean the amount of percentages, but you just kind of see the color combinations that you're doing. Okay. This had probably a lot more than this, but I can get what I need from this, guys, easily. I mean, this is way more than majority of the cases will require. Majority of the cases, you're probably going to use something like this, and something like this, and maybe something like that. And then you're going to be done. Just fill this up, and then you're good to go. And like I said, you know, pre-mix your colors if you want and just store them. That won't be a problem at all. Just make sure your base acrylic is that color, and you're fine with it. And if you're even if you're doing opaques, you can mix. Don't quote me on this. I haven't checked with the R&D department, but I'm pretty certain that you can mix luster paints with your opaques and get the color of the opaques that you want without having any issues. So to me, can you do ethnic shades straight out of the syringe? No, but how long does it really take to mix this? Not really a big deal in my opinion. But that's the way that the system was designed. I mean, it was designed to have the basic colors, the 3 basic colors, and then from that you design to make a combination of what you need. They basically, what they did is they kind of followed the Crown and Bridge guys, because that's what they do. I mean, they just most of the time they will just mix things the way that they need, without because teeth they're not like denture teeth, right? They don't come in like A1, A2, and 3. There's usually a mixture of things, so they're used to mixing stuff. So for us, it might be an issue, but Crown and Bridge, they don't have any problems there at all. All right, so now that the denture has cured completely, what I generally do is I'll go and I'll clean this off, and then I'll lightly pumice this and then sandblast it, and then apply glaze to it. But we're not going to do that right now. I might do that during the break or something, and just get things prepared. Or I'm not sure. I might just show you guys how to glaze things. Maybe not on this one. Maybe on something else. I will finish this up eventually and glaze it and post pictures for sure. Okay. What time is it now? It is 3 o'clock. So let's take another 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and I'll show you something like this. Okay, I'll go from there. If you have any questions, let me know, and we'll try to cover everything we can. See you soon. Okay, guys, so I'm back, and hopefully you guys can see me. For some reason, my computer is actually not doing too well either. Please message in the comment, in the chat. Let me know if you guys can see me okay or not, because I'm not 100% sure what's going on. Okay, I haven't heard anything, but I'm going to start a little bit. Hopefully somebody can see what's going on. No messages yet. Showing I have internet. Looks like we're live here. I don't know. Let me text somebody. See if they can see me or not. Oh, I see something coming through. Okay, good. Mike says he can see me. That's good. It's probably just my internet is being a mess. Okay, so here we have a prototype. This one's printed. But you see the reduction was done on this end. It was done, just printed, and here I've actually reduced things a little bit more by using a burr. So first thing you do is obviously the same thing. Apply the primer, and I'm using Composite Primer in this case. And you see I have like a little butt margin right here. Just so I have a nice and clean stop. I'm also going to just apply half an arch. Just like that. Okay, and like here for 1 minute. And while let's like here, I'm going to talk a little bit about things. So I actually, while we were on a break, I actually went and I, here's me using my dirty fingers, sorry. Went and I actually polished it a little bit, and then I sandblasted and I steam cleaned it and dried it. So now it's ready to get the Optiglaze applied to it. Hopefully I didn't touch it with my hand, but just apply it, and then I'll just spread it with a brush. And this will be my sort of like an opaque layer, to be honest with you. But it's not really opaque, but I'm using it almost as an opaque, just to hide that white. And in all honesty, guys, oftentimes, quite a few people that I know, they don't go through all this trouble. It's a prototype. I mean, it's not like it's a permanent restoration. This is what they're going to wear for, you know, a couple of months max, hopefully, just when they're trying out the bite and everything else. It's simply for that. It doesn't need to be highly aesthetic. And actually, they prefer it not to be highly aesthetic, just so the patient comes back. So for them, it's like they don't care if it's blocked out enough or not. They'll just take one color and just cover it up and good to go. It's somewhat pink. It's good to go. So I am not saying I'm against that. I'm just showing you a couple of different options. Just so if you need to make it like this, let's say down the line, you're going to have like a milled restoration that's going to be worn for a long time, but it was all milled out of white, and you do want to make it more aesthetic, then you know, this might be the option for you. So you have to be careful when you're working with live bodies. And if you're adding it like this, moving this direction, there's a very high possibility you're going to flow your live body onto your the tooth. So I kind of go back and forth, just kind of playing teeter-totter a little bit with this, because I don't want to. I want to make sure I get it interproximally, and I want to make sure I get enough to the DEJ, but at the same time, I don't want to. I don't want to get it on the tooth, and I didn't mix enough material, so I'm going to need to mix a little bit more. Gum light body 1 and gum light body 3. Too one. That's okay. It's going to be a little bit darker, but it's okay. You guys will forgive me, hopefully. Just like this. All right. Okay. So I see pretty much got everything sort of blocked out. Close as I want it to. And this one has a reduction of 0.5 millimeters instead of 1 millimeter, so it's a pretty minimal reduction. And you'll see that even with that little reduction, you're able to get the results that you want without having to compromise on things color-wise. Got a bit too much right here. I don't want to have full contour, you know, with this stuff. I just want to make sure I block out enough enough white with it, because if I have full contour, I won't have any room to add my second layer to. But I think I'm getting there pretty well at this point. Right there. Obviously closer to the tooth is more important, that away. And K9 can have a lot more white showing through because of the eminencia. But I think this is where I want to be right now. And if it's not enough, I can always just add a little bit more and secure this. It becomes a bit difficult to control once you get things too flowy. I'm using my step light feature right now just to kind of freeze everything in place. Okay, because I want to make sure I don't have it flowing away too much. Okay, I'm gonna put a little bit more right here. A little bit more right here. Just right in these zones. Okay, that should be good. And I'll do 1 minute cure. That should freeze that layer pretty well. Get my brush with alcohol and let it sit here. Clean this up. All right, any questions so far? Nope, we're doing good. Excellent. We're kind of on our last portion of these things, so hopefully you guys are not too tired. I know this is a very long webinar. This is usually how long my courses take and stuff like this. I do teach full day courses. But GC has asked me to do this and kind of explain things and everything else, and I didn't want to just kind of shortchange you guys. I didn't want to shortchange GC, so I'm giving you probably more than you wanted to hear today, but you know, you can always just come back and rewatch it later if you want to. Okay, so now that this is cured, we're good to go. So a lot of people will just take like a mixture of 1 and 3 or 1 and 2 like this, for example, and they'll just put it on. They'll put it on they'll put it, which I can't seem to manage, sorry. And they'll just adapt it. And be good with it. Which is absolutely fine in my opinion. I mean, you don't need to go overboard. I mean, technically, you don't even need to do the first layer. Because if you do, if you apply it, okay, so it'll be a little lighter than what you need. And that's it. That's the only thing. So if you take like number 1, it'll be lighter in some areas, darker than the others, and that's the only thing you're going to see. So with prototypes, it's not a big deal. If you want to go with one color and don't even want to do the first layer, that's absolutely fine. And a lot of people get really good results just by doing that. I wanted to show you guys a more, in-depth way, which is just the way it is, right? So that's why I'm doing it a step-by-step. And that's what I usually do during on my courses. I've kind of show people different techniques and kind of let them decide what they want to do. Do you want to spend 3 hours on a prototype? That's probably going to bring that much time, money into it, or maybe you do, because usually when you spend a lot of time on things and get things done in a certain way, sometimes that will bring money in by itself. So let me put. I might have to use a different spatula here because these contours are much smoother and smaller. So I will use. What will I use? I will use this. This is an Optic tool made by Ivoclar. So I'm just going to put this right here. Free gingiva. Gonna put this right here. Actually, I might need to go smaller than this. Sorry, guys. Wrong tool. That's why I have several of them. I'm going to go back to this. This is the Smile Line one. Yeah, that's the one that's going to work best. So I got a thin Smile Line spatula that I'm going to use for interproximals. Because when you're dealing with smaller teeth, it's a little bit more difficult to manipulate things. You do end up getting things in places where you don't need to be. Like that. I really like these colors. They're kind of more of a pinkish rather than brownish tint to them. It's one thing I was kind of lacking before. Okay, so I got my mixture that's a little lighter and a little darker. So I'm going to use my lighter one here. Like that. I'm going to use my red right here. I'm not going to be using any purple on this one because I mean it's a pretty short denture, and if I'm going to put, because it doesn't go down to the mucosa, right? So using purple up here, it doesn't look right. So here's we're just going to have reds. No purples, just light and dark reds. And here we get our mixture of the eminentia, like this. And a little bit more red right here. And that should be good. And just move on to the next one. There we go. So I got number 1, free gingival mix. Right here. I can use my brush to adapt a little bit better. Good, that's exactly it. Okay, slightly darker gingival mix right here to blend with reds. Eminentia mix. And back to red. So nothing too fancy, or actually comparison to prototype gingiva, this is pretty fancy. But also it's kind of like what you want to use on titanium sort of kind of thing, right? Except you'd use a different opaque. Wouldn't be white, so you'd opaque the layer first, and then you would do the same thing. You would do a layer of pink, flowable, and then you would do the rest. So even though I'm making a fancy prototype mix, it's going to be a good mix of composites for your thimble part type illustration. So hopefully also give you something to work with. I'm just going to do these teeth right here, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you kind of guys already have the idea of what I'm trying to show you. And I think I'll just be wasting your time, but by going making the whole thing. Okay, a little bit more on the miniature, because it's a canine, like that, and then just the red one right here. All right, and then we're just gonna go and adapt this. Make sure you get it nice and well adapted approximately. Push it right to the gingival margin, just so you don't see that little step where you reduce the tooth, or the gingiva by the tooth. And then just adapt things here and make sure you have a nice interproximal for gingival roll. So it's not too bulky, but also not too flat, because you want it to be cleansable. But you see how you have that butt margin right here, and it adapts really nice and flush against it. But also when you go to polish it, it's going to make sure that it's got a nice polish and seal to in this area, in this region. Okay, works pretty well. All right, so that's about it. So what we're gonna do now is do 2 cures. It's a little light right here, actually. I need to do a little bit more right here. Sorry, I missed the spot. See right here, the canine just a little bit lighter than I want it to be. A little bit too thin, so I'm just gonna add a little bit of right there. That's good, just like that. Okay, we have nice contours, we have nice changes in colors. Okay, and freeze it for a minute, apply air barrier, and that's it. Then you polish, sandblast, dry clean, and Optiglaze. So let me show you a couple more little things. So we're done with the palette. We don't need the palette anymore. Let me unplug this. What am I doing here? Too many wires. Let me move this. Clean this up. Alright, I don't need to show you guys the other steps on that prototype for the cleaning and processing it. Same as I did on the pink denture. But what I did want to show you guys is how I do Optiglaze application on the tooth and on the gingiva at the same time. Well, different dentures, but applying it at the same time. So I'm going to grab my kit here, and we're going to use the clear, and we're going to use white, ivory white, lavender, and a little bit of A+. Okay, do that. So what we need is, this is the clear. I don't know why I just mixed it. You don't need to mix the clear, it's already mixed. Lavender. These you gotta make sure you mix well. A+. Ivory white. And white. All right. So let's assume that this has been already sandblasted and cleaned, and we're ready to apply things. So I try to use a couple of brushes just so I'll mix the colors together and so I can clean them. So I'll just grab a couple of brushes and I'll just clean them in between and set them aside. So I'll just have my alcohol and I have my little handle thing. So I'll just clean them and set them aside when I'm done with them, kind of like this. Okay, so here's a clean brush. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take just some clear and I'm going to use it almost as a primer, just priming my canvas like this. Okay. I didn't technically sandblast this, so it's not as ready. Plus, I'm putting glaze all over the teeth and some gums. You don't need to do that, obviously, because we're not going to be staining gums. So you have to be a little bit more careful and put it just on the teeth. But if I was glazing the this and the ginger at the same time, yeah, you would go all over the place. Okay, so I primed it, and now it's kind of sticky at this point. Okay, because I kind of thinned it out, and it's also becoming sticky. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clean the brush, set it aside. I'm going to take a clean brush. So I used to use blue on the edges, then I used gray, and then I went, when I was teaching one of the courses, one of the guys was a Crown Bridge Tech, and he's like, try lavender because it doesn't mess with the value. So that's what I tried, and using a little bit of lavender, I'm going to put it right on the cutting edges, right on the sizzle area of the teeth, to show that little transparency. There's a difference between transparency and translucency. One shows translucency, the other shows transparency color-wise. Problem is I can't never remember which one does what. And since I was trained as a denture tech and not a crown and bridge tech, I can't remember those things. I don't use it very often. Okay, so you don't want to put a lot on there. I mean, you don't want it to like jump out at you. So I'm just putting a little bit just so it kind of shows through. And I'm going to do the same thing with the sides. Just show it doesn't have that much of opacity to it. Okay. And just bring it up and down a little bit. Just bringing those teeth to life just a little bit. Just they don't look like dead pieces of plastic. All right. Might have to do a little bit on the insides over here. Okay. Clean the brush. Try it. Grab a clean one. So I'm going to use a little bit of A+. I'm just going to warm up the cervicals just a little bit with that A+. Just so it doesn't look so monolithic. And oftentimes I don't know if I'm using enough or not enough. To me, I'd rather use too little and then go back in and just try to add a little bit more than to use too much right from the start. When I first started using this stuff, and Josh Polanski told me, he was a great car and bridge tech, he said, you know what, if you can see it, you're using too much. So that's what I kind of do. I can barely see it, so it should be just the right amount. Okay, so lavender, A+ here. And I'm going to use white just to create that little bend in the middle. Just to break up the color a little bit. Just like that. I know I used my finger to clean the brush. Sorry. Don't tell anybody. Okay, and once this is done, I can use ivory white to do little crack lines if I need to. So for that one, I like to use a really, really thin brush, which I had here somewhere. Where's my little... Where is it? There it is. Found it. So I got a brush that I kind of just made myself, that I just cut another brush apart. And I use that for my crack lines. So I'll just put that in and just kind of... brush the crack lines through. Like that. I don't know if you guys can see that on YouTube or not. It's pretty tiny. Okay, so like this. And what you can also do is you can actually grab some white again and go right at the incisal edge, as they call it, to create little halo effects. Okay. Once that is all done, you need to freeze it, just so you don't end up moving those colors when you go in to put the second layer on top, your protection layer. Okay, and then you take a clean brush, take some fresh clear, cover everything up. It's your protection layer. Don't go too thick, you know, you want to make sure you still have your contours. And now at this point, go ahead and cure it for a minute and a half. And that should be good to go. Once that is finished, you can go ahead and polish it up if you want to, if you don't like that fakish shine on it. But that should be okay for the those kinds of applications. One thing I wanted to mention for the final layer, I didn't do this right now, but for the final layer, I try to use disposable brushes, because the top coat of Optiglaze, if it has any kind of what do you call it, contamination or anything else from the brush, it can prevent things from curing properly. So just so to be on the safe side, what I generally do is I'll just use a brand new clean disposable brush when I'm doing any kind of top coat Optiglaze application, whether that being on a denture or on a tooth. It just makes things a lot better, and I have a lot less headache. I mean, that 20 cents that the brush is going to cost you is going to be a lot less problematic than if you're going to have to, see, I use these brushes, if you're going to have to redo the glaze and stuff like that. So on the denture, just wanted to show you guys. So we cleaned everything up. I don't have a glove on, but I'll be staying away from this area. So we want to apply the glaze in this region right here. So I got my glaze. Use my, oops, almost dropped the dampen dish. See? Nice and cured. I always do a fingernail test to make sure there was no contamination. If it doesn't scratch with my fingernail, we're good. All right. So this is a regular Optiglaze. And what I do is I hold the denture like this because I don't want the glaze to flow on top of the teeth right here. So I hold it like this and I go very carefully and approximately everything like this. So what I do generally, I don't start right at the tooth. I'll just start a little bit below it and I'll work it right up to the top. Just like this. See that? So what it allows me to do is still have all the areas sealed up, but I don't have a pulling of the glaze in that region. Okay? Just like this. See, I'm able to seal everything, but there's no pulling. Because I hate looking at dentures, and when you look at the glaze, and you can see the glaze right between the teeth, like it's been filled in. I don't want to see that. You know, I want to have a more natural looking papilla. And I'm not glazing the teeth. The teeth are just going to be high shined. Just like that. So at this point, you just cure the whole thing, and I usually just throw the brush away. Or you can reuse it on something else. You know, use it on your acrylic repairs and stuff like this. You can clean it and use it for something else. It's not a problem. It's just I don't like using it on Optiglaze again. This kind of Optiglaze. So from here, what you usually do, if you don't like the glaze, if it looks too aggressive for you, there's two discs you can use. You can use this one from 3M, or you can use this, I don't know what it is. I mean, some Chinese company makes this. Be careful with these discs. They're a lot cheaper, but if you're not wearing proper eye protection, they have a tendency to fall apart and jump out right in your eye. I had actually a piece go right under my visor once. But if you look, I mean, let's see, turn this on. If you look, they're not, the gray ones are not aggressive at all. So when you're going, they're just kind of break things up a little bit. And don't use a lot of pressure, just use very little pressure because they are harder. Okay, but if you use the 3M ones or Hatha ones, they're a lot softer, so you can use more pressure on these without having to worry about breaking anything up. So what you're doing pretty much right now is just breaking up the glaze, not removing it, you're just breaking up the top surface like this, so you're taking away that fakish shine. You still have a nice coat of the glaze on top of things. But what you'll go back in is I'm using these really, really soft cotton. They're almost like, I don't know, you see they lose their shape, they're so soft. And I'm using palette polish. And just going right on top of things and just... I had some in there still, so that's why I'm not reapplying it. I'm just not sure if I had enough or not. But now you see how it polished it up, and it has a nice like a polished denture shine instead of that really, really aggressive glaze shine to it. And you still have nice details and translucency and whatever in there. Okay, but on the dentures, once it cures, that's pretty much it. You can go back in, which is what I usually do, and go back in with the palette polish stuff